my name is Maria. I work with the European Federation of Academies of Sciences and Humanities, or ALLEA for short, and we organize outreach events on behalf of CoARA, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, which is a global movement, I must emphasize, to reform research assessment and move practices ideally as away from quantitative metrics as we can reasonably do. I won't talk too much about CoARA because our first speaker is going to do that for us. But I just wanted to say welcome, and we are on this shared mission with DORA, which is why we are co-organizing this event together. And I also just want to say a big thank you to Force 11 and SMU for very, very generously hosting us here today. And thank you, Bella, for working with us on this. Yeah. Oh.
And we are also going to have two facilitators with us today, so it's going to be a really nice day. And you have seen the program, you have received it via email, but we will go through it really quickly. I am now 1 minute above time. As you can see, we were supposed to start now with Cameron. We will have an overview of the global movements, and then we will hear what's happening on the ground here in Asia. Then we'll have the panel discussion, and then we break for lunch. So the first part of the day is a little bit more hearing. You're going to hear a lot, and then after lunch, you need to be quite active. And so we're avoiding the morning dip, the pre-after lunch dip. No one's taking any siestas today, because after lunch, we will have the breakout rooms. You have, when you registered, indicated topics that you wanted to discuss, and we have assigned you the different, two different breakout rooms. So in one session, we're discussing quantitative indicators, and the other, the ethics of AI. And each of them are sparked by a short presentation by some colleagues, which I will introduce later today. And then the breakout session on open science and university rankings. And we have assigned you, but if you really want to change, you may consider prioritize. We then break for coffee, and then we have a very exciting thing, which is we're connecting to Budapest. Budapest is also having an event today about reforming research assessment, all the way from the European region is meeting in Budapest. And we will hear from them what they are going to do today, so that's exciting. That's around 4 p.m., 4:20. And then we'll close the day with the reflections of the breakouts and everything. Anyone has any questions on what's happening today? About lunch, I have no idea what's going to be served, so thank you for not asking about that. We are going to, well, perhaps I should have introduced myself. So I'm the program manager for DORA, the Declaration of Research Assessment, and I also don't have to introduce DORA because Ginny is going to do it, and who better than my boss to do it, right? And then we will start with our research reform movements around the world. Cameron, it's up to you to start us off, to kick us off. I will introduce Cameron. Well, he doesn't really need introduction, but anyway, I'm doing it anyway. He has been involved in advocacy for research reform assessment for 20 years. He was professor of research communications at Curtin. He started CoARA, which is a quite, how do you say that, very famous initiative, and he's in the steering. He is a steering board member of CoARA, the steering group for the Barcelona Declaration, who's also going to talk with us today, and the advisory board of open citations. And while Maria puts his presentation on, I'll keep talking about him. He was a co-author of the Principles for Open Scholarly Infrastructure, the this is hard. Automatrix Manifesto. In Portuguese, it would be easy. The books, Open Knowledge Institutions, Reading Peer Review, Supporting Research Communications, a Guide, and Open Scholarship and the Need for Collective Action, which is what we're doing today here. So, Maria, can I stop buying time? Okay. Should be on? Let's see. Oh, that's Jeannie's. And, oh, there it is. So I will grab my bottle of water and sit on the side. Cameron, you and all the speakers in this session will have 10 minutes, and I will not let you go over because it's my job not to let you go over. So there is a clicker, and there is a mic as well. Can you press the little button in the middle and see if it goes green? This one here. Let me see that go. It doesn't go green. I don't want to. Can you, if the volume is not good, can you spin this thing?
Can people hear me? Thumbs up. Yep. Okay, so thank you, Giovanna.
It's how to call that? It's making a lot of noise. Hitting the thing. So perhaps on it.
Yeah. That's better. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I have the privilege of going first. I'm here in my role as steering board member of CoARA. Great to see so many people from so many different organisations and activities here as well. But because I was going first, I did want to just take the opportunity to step back a little bit and really ask this question. Why do we do research? And I mean that sort of at a couple of different levels. You know, for those of us involved in doing research directly, what's our personal motivations? For those of you who are involved in supporting it in different ways and different roles, what's your personal kind of interest and motivation in this? But also organisationally and nationally, we do research for different reasons in different parts of the world, and with different policy focuses and with different systems and approaches. So we don't necessarily even start from the same place of what research is for and what our motivations are for it. I think what we have in common, and what I wanted to really emphasise over the next couple of minutes, was that we have an interest in doing what we are doing better. And so the goal of research evaluation is to test whether our research is doing what it is intended to do, whether our systems are working in the way they should. And the goal of research evaluation reform is to make that process better, to discharge our responsibility to taxpayers, to deliver better opportunities for society, economically and socially, but also to drive those aspects of curiosity and interest in the world that enrich all of us in different ways and in different places. So there are these many different reasons, and that leads to a set of different approaches in different places. What's in common has been this sense that there are things about research evaluation which we need to do better, and that sense has grown up in a number of places in different ways at the same kind of time. And one of those is led to the development of CoARA. And CoARA is an effort with global ambitions and global reach and with European roots. And I want to sort of, in this context, really emphasise the story and the roots of where we come from, to link that to all the other things you're also going to hear about. CoARA was founded from a sense of frustration, specifically in Europe, that things could perhaps move faster and that there was a need for institutions to agree on a set of actions, a set of things to change. And this was in a European context, and it was driven in significant part by the European Commission. And so they led through a process of consensus building with organisations. It was, again, a global invitation to take part, but primarily European organisations, with that, to develop this agreement. I'll touch on the agreement in a second, with this overarching goal to maximise the quality and impact of research by setting a common direction. So that's a shared, what is it that we share? What are these shared values? What is the shared direction we're taking forward? And the agreement includes principles, commitments, and timeframes for reform. So it's really a sort of an effort to really sharpen the sense of movement that already existed, that it was already being delivered by initiatives like DORA and FOLEC and others in either other parts of the world or coming from different places. Which one of these is actually the full cut? What did I say? pointed that way. That's what that's pointed that way. So CoARA is a coalition. It's a coalition for advancing research assessment. It's intended to bring together all of the actors in the public research space, acting as a coalition, supporting each other through making commitments, through making plans, and taking things forward at an organisational and a community level to implement the agreement and to make this commitment by becoming the signatory to take those key commitments, 4 key commitments, the supporting commitments that I'll mention in a moment, forward. Currently 968 signatories and 827 members. That's a minor distinction, but I want to make sure that people are clear. You can sign the agreement without necessarily becoming a member of the coalition. That's important for some organisations where membership is not something the organisation can do or where it doesn't have a formal form. And at the end of last year, CoARA had its 3rd formal birthday, though the work of ALLEA and others has actually gone on longer than that. There's an interesting kind of history as to the development of these things in practice. But let's talk about the agreement. That's kind of the core piece. Oh, I see. Sorry, so what's happening? The computer's advancing, but the screen's not catching up. Press this again, it's not, it's going to, all right, so, yes, right. The agreement has 4 core commitments, and it's a relatively long document, so I don't want to go into detail, but these 4 core commitments make up the centre of the action plans that organisations sign up to be involved. The first is to recognise the diversity of contributions, both in terms of the way research is done and in the kinds of career paths people might take. To base, as Maria said, research assessment primarily on qualitative evaluation, for which peer review is central, supported by the responsible use of quantitative indicators. I'm sure this is going to come up and be a point of discussion in terms of what that means. But this doesn't mean you throw away quantitative processes. It means that you use it in a way which is contextualized and appropriate to the question of evaluation after. Abandon the inappropriate use of research assessment of journal and publication-based metrics. So this really derives from the work of DORA, which really made a strong start with its roots in that particular area and has obviously grown more than that. And avoid the use of rankings. So again, university rankings as one of the things that is seen as a problem. And again, it's interesting making that point in the context of Singapore and Southeast Asia, where again, I think we did talk in a regional context around where organisations are and what the goals are and what the intents are. So let's see if we can get the slides. There are a set of supporting commitments that go with that, which the screen will eventually catch up with, which are really about action and moving things forward. So it's committing resources, it's having a plan, it's reviewing that plan and implementing it over time, communicating progress, becoming part of the coalition, and exchanging practices and experiences. So 4 big sort of content areas, and then these 10 sort of practical things. So it's quite a lot of detail, and I'll come back to that point at the end. There's quite a lot to sign up to here, and it's intended as a move forward. There are, well, that's interesting. 3 major things in the coalition. There are working groups that look at particular things. I don't have time to go into those. National chapters are a really important part of what's going on. These actually really grew kind of organically. And I don't know whether Bianca's going to talk about national chapters, but I think it's really interesting that national organisation forms are things that are really driving forward a lot of these assessments. And then there has also been resource. Again, this is one of those things where it's the cascade funding is only available to those of you who are within the Horizon Europe programs, which includes some of the countries represented. It might even include Australia at some point in the future. But I know New Zealand's at least part of the Horizon Europe program. So this is my last slide. So I want to come back to this point, and I want to finish with sort of view of what all these initiatives mean together. As I said, we discussed this last night, but CoARA is a global movement with aspirations to drive change around the world with European roots, and with its sensitivities and sensibilities and history rooted in the situation in Europe. The membership is strongest in Europe, with international representation, international coordination. And so you could look at this and say this is a problem, and say, oh no, what we need to do is make sure that we have more members, more signatories all around the world. And I actually rather look at this as an opportunity. This is a place where CoARA has strength and we have links and connections around the world. But as you're going to hear, there are other initiatives that have different focuses, different ways of working, different approaches to systems, and different specific concerns. So we're not here on a membership drive to have a competition that has the most members, the most signatories. I think we're all here with a focus on what is it we can do to support organisations to make change in the context they're operating in to move forward. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. So, next, and while Maria puts up her slides, I'll introduce you. Ooh, sorry. Oh, maybe it's yours. Okay. I'll introduce you to my boss, Professor Ginny Barbour. She is the editor-in-chief of the Medical Journal of Australia. She's also an adjunct professor at QT, the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. She's trained as a clinical and academic hematologist in the UK before coming to this world. She joined the Lancet in '99, then she went for PLOS Medicine, and she's been involved in many international initiatives in open access, scholarly communication, publication, research integrity. She's a member of the Australian NHMRC, acronyms are hard, and MRFF, Public Health and Health Systems Committee, and she was previously the chair of the Committee on Publication Ethics, SCOPE. Ginny, thank you. Your 10 minutes will start now.
Fantastic, thank you, Giovanna. You got the memo about my bio, so very good. So it's great to be here. Fantastic to be in the time zone, not jet lagged and giving a talk. To all my Australian friends, you know this is great. So yes, I'm here representing DORA. I am one of the co-chairs, as Giovanna said. So my colleague Kelly Covey in Canada is the other co-chair, and Rebecca Lawrence, who's based in London, is the vice chair. And we act as a sort of collective, and Giovanna keeps us in line as much as we can. I also want to acknowledge Janet, who's over there, who's supporting us. So I'm going to introduce you to DORA. So as Cameron had alluded to, so DORA kicked off in 2013. So we started back at a time when there was a need to articulate what the issues were around problems with research assessment. So I think it was probably the first proper articulation of the challenges that have been in this space. I actually got very interested in it when I worked at PLOS Medicine, because we discovered that if we wanted to be an innovative journal, actually we were going to be the impact factor would actually cause us problems. When we first started PLOS Medicine, people actually said to us, oh, you better not publish anything on global health because that's going to take the citations down. So it was, for me, that was the first proper articulation of the problem. So what are the things that we aim to talk about initially? So the problem that we have is that misuse of research assessment happens at really critical points in a researcher's career. So we know that happens at the hiring, the funding, at every point across their career decisions. The problem that we have is when these metrics are used to define things that are not actually core to what researchers need to be doing. There's a disconnect between what they're measured by and what they actually want to do. So the declaration does have some very specific recommendations, both for funders, for institutions, for individuals, to move beyond journal-based metrics, but it actually encompasses a whole lot more than that. So the thing that we know that happens because when we focus on quantitative metrics is that you also end up with problems around people chasing publications that publish or post in high impact factor journals that leads to a misalignment of research priorities. We know this is a particular problem if you're sitting outside of the global north, and that can really disadvantage people from outside the traditional research system. And groups that have particular issues with this are early career researchers who we know struggle within the system, and people who come from marginalised groups such as, for example, Indigenous academics who are absolutely not served by the current system. Okay, so take the time to walk through it. So one of the things that we know is that the DORA declaration does have a huge global reach, and one of the reasons for that, I think, is it has become a rallying point for individuals who care about the system and who want to see some change in it. So what you can see in this diagram here is this the deeper yellow is the area where there's been more signatories, and I think what that just reflects at this point is we know that there is an opportunity in some of these countries to move towards reform. So, for example, Canada, there's a lot of signatories. Again, signatories in Europe is the same as Cameron mentioned for CoARA, relatively high numbers in Australia and New Zealand. We're not seeing a lot in the rest of the Asia Pacific, so I think that's, again, a real opportunity. And I think the reason why we're here today is because we understand there is a need to think about it, particularly in regions like this. Okay, so what's our mission now? So over the time, DORA has very much evolved from being solely a statement of principles to an active global organisation. As I said, we've got people everywhere campaigning for reform. And so I think that is something that we absolutely align with CoARA and with the other initiatives in this space. Our overarching vision is to advance practical and robust approaches to reforming research assessment globally and across all scholarly disciplines. So, my next slide actually, Cameron and I obviously both like icebergs. This actually came from a presentation from a colleague in Ireland. What this really indicates to us, I think, is that most of the activities that researchers do and that they're rewarded for are are only a small part of what's actually rewarded. So all the things at the bottom, particularly things like team science, mentorship, often the things that people who are not the traditionally successful academics do, are not rewarded within the current system. Things like data sharing, things that report open science, absolutely not part of the system. So I think we probably all know this, but this is a really nice articulation of the fact that we don't actually count the things that we care about. So we work globally, and these are our core objectives. We're actually in the process of redefining our strategy for the next 3 years, but these are the ones that we've focused on at the moment. So we have raising awareness. This is a really critical part, really talking to people in an informed way about what the problem of the current system is and thinking about novel changes. Developing tools and resources to support that people can actually use and take to their institutions or whichever organisation they're working in to support change, and then supporting advocates for change. So I think, as I said, we've got 27,000 people who've signed. They really want to have something to use that they can work with to change assessment of their institutions. So just some examples of how we work, and these are all online, obviously. The delay, you kind of see what's coming. So we have a resource library which has a multitude of things within it, including scholarly articles and a whole bunch of sort of related initiatives outside of DORA. We also have some really great case stories. Now, we put up here four from this region, so from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, University of Tokyo, Queensland University of Technology, where I come from, where Tina's going to talk about a bit later, and from Envy. And so we are very keen to see more case stories from this region, because we find that people really helps them articulate when they want to think about changing their own institution. We also have the Formscape, which is a global initiative, which is an observatory of responsible research assessment practices, primarily focused on institutions at the moment. So one I want to particularly focus on, and Cameron talked a little bit about this, is we know there is a problem about using quantitative indicators and actually having a way to articulate why they're problematic and how you might use them responsibly. So this came out a couple of years ago. There's 5 principles that are part of this, so being clear about why you're using it, being really transparent. I think that's one of the frustrations, particularly for academics, when they are measured by quantitative indicators, they don't understand that that's happening. Being really specific, putting them in context and being fair. And we found this is a really useful resource to share with organisations that are using quantitative indicators. And then some other things that we have thought about is that, again, we want to get everybody on the same page when we're talking about research assessment. So this was a course that came out this year, yes, so started this year. It's got 4 modules, it's free. I really encourage you to get your anyone who would like to be part of this, because what we really hope this will do is bring people onto the same page when we're talking about research assessment. And then 2 things that we've done most recently are some guides which are directed at specific communities. So the first one was for research performing organisations, that came out last year. That was developed a co-creation workshop in Washington at the beginning of last year. There are 2 that they're broadly similar in scope, and I'll show you the one on funders in a moment. But the aim of these is to, again, it's to have practical resources that organisations can take away and use in their day-to-day. So this, it's set in, there are 4 chapters in it, so there's an introduction, there's a chapter which talks about how some real specifics of how you can make change at particular points in time, and then there's one about some, then chapter 3 is about some key moments. So for this one, for example, it talks about what you're doing within your institution. It might be when you are putting promotion forward, how you think about the activities around that. And then for the funder guide, which is came out very recently, so it's very new. We encourage you to have it. It's already had over 1,000 downloads, so I think it is hitting a spot. There's a kind of an interest in what this is doing. This also has an introduction. It has a chapter on key activities and a chapter on the key moments. And for funders, that is likely to be where you establish your funding programs, where you make funding decisions, how you set your grant terms, how you communicate, etc. But the thing that we're most proud of in many ways for this chapter, this particular resource, is we come up with a chapter which looks at the whole concept of the research ecosystem, where responsible research assessment sits within it. This has been something, this is not a new idea. I know many of you will be thinking about, when you're thinking about open science, how that relates to responsible research assessment, but here we've really articulated it. So what you can see is that all the other components, so we have the responsible research culture, responsible use of metrics, information infrastructure, theme equity, diversity, and how you societal impact, the inter and transdisciplinary nature of research, and scholarly communication. And what we're hoping to do is that this will really spark a conversation when we're thinking about any type of reform of the research system. So quickly in the Asia Pacific, I realise I'm probably slightly running out of time. We have an Asia Pacific 30 seconds. The Asia Pacific Funder Group, if you're not part of that, I really encourage you to join. It has a very diverse and rich set of conversations. We have a community of practice in Australia. We also have a working group that is in Japan, which has been really important in helping us translate some resources. I was involved also in the APAC. It's developing a resource on open science, and we were able to get responsible research assessment into that, and that will be coming out very shortly. This slide. Okay, there we go. So keep a lookout for that. This last slide is just a bit about all the things that you can do with DORA. I won't spend time on that because you know about it. We have some fantastic supporting organisations. If you're interested in supporting us, we'd love to hear from you. Please keep in touch with us. I think there are many areas of research assessment which interact with all of what you're doing, so please be in touch if this is something you'd like to support. Thanks, Joanne. Thank you.
We will keep throwing a lot of information at you. Don't worry, there's no exam in the end, so you can relax and keep listening to these amazing initiatives that are trying to change the world. We'll now hear from John Shodaki, who's coming representing Make Data Count. He is the director of the University of California Curation Center, UC3, that's an easy one, at California Digital Library. As director, John works across the UC campuses in the broader community to ensure digital curation services meet the emerging needs of the scholarly community, including digital preservation, persistent identifiers, data management, data publishing, all the infrastructure we need to make our assessment possible. Prior to being at the California Digital Library, John was working with publishing organizations such as the O'Reilly Media, Safari Books Online, and PLOS. And he, and perhaps I'll thank him on behalf also of IRACHE and First 11 conference as a whole. He's in the board of First 11 conference, and then also DataCite, Crossref, WAR, Counter, Open Citations, Metadata 2020. I can go on. Collaborative metadata enrichment, RDA US, the carpentries, and then make data count. John, thanks a million. Okay. You should have this little box like I have, this one. Do you? And then, yes, let's make this happen. Do you want to hold it?
Here? Yeah. That's fine. I don't mind. Is this what you want me to do? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of information about me, but actually the fun fact that I should start with is that the first three presenters of this day all actually work together. So Jenny and Cameron and I, 10 years ago, were actually colleagues. Coming from, I think Cameron came in from Sweden, Jenny from Australia, I'm from California. We came from all over the world to Singapore, and we actually worked for the same organization 10 years ago. So small world, we're all connected. So I'm here to discuss Make Data Count. So obviously this is a conversation that's about research assessment. Often what we talk about when we talk about research assessment is evolving metrics and incentive structures that are really focused on publications. So like PDF documents people write and then publish. Make Data Count really came out of a movement that was thinking about, well, how do we think of these same types of ideas, but thinking about it in terms of research data. And so what I wanted to do is first just introduce you to what Make Data Count is, and then kind of talk through all the different work that we do within the Make Data Count movement, and then get to how it affects or pertains to the subject today. So I now understand the confusion that the two previous presenters had about how the slides don't advance. Okay, so Make Data Count is truly just a community driven organization. We are run by volunteers. We bring together people who are like-minded and interested in the topic. And we're really here as a change movement to think about how we can advance open metrics for research data that are meaningful and responsible. And I think a lot of the terminology that's in this type of into these types of statements is very similar to how DORA and CoARA and others are talking about just research assessment and research evaluation in general. Really focusing though on the unique problems and challenges we have on doing this type of work and this type of efforts when it comes to research data as a research output. So Make Data Count thinks of like the work that we need to do, the way that we want to influence change in three big bucket areas. The first big bucket area is that we actually do work on evolving the infrastructure behind research data. So thinking about how we collect and store measures of data usage, what does that mean? How is it different from different types of data? And thinking about research data itself as an actual output that can be measured and what we should do to support that. The second big area that we work in is within standards. So we work with standards organizations on quantifying what are those types of things. So what does it mean to have a data download? What is that? What does it mean to have a page view on a repository? Or what does it mean to interact with a data set? And defining those as standards, because those standards in many ways don't exist and haven't existed in the past. The third way is around advocacy. So change movements, these types of efforts where we're really trying to evolve the community of practice, evolve the way researchers think of research, but also the way institutions and funders think about it as well. So the first big area that I'll talk about is just the open infrastructure side of things. So data usage, and the term data usage means different things to different people. So one of the challenges that Make Data Count is trying to tackle is really around this idea of how do we collect and standardize the data usage indicators. So in the world of papers, there may or may not be well understood of how do people measure usage or downloads. In data, it's obviously different, potentially more complicated and more politicized in some ways, but potentially not in other ways. But research data is something that has a unique set of challenges, and so we work closely with the communities on a practice on different types of data and think about how we can standardize and normalize. And much of the work that we're doing here is not to say that we can actually solve these problems 100%. I think this is one of maybe a common theme that will come out of this. It's not like the answer to these issues is actually a statement. It's potentially a discussion, right? It's we are not here to say that there was a way to do it before and now we have a new way of doing it that is consistent and 100% exactly the same way. What it is that we're talking about nuance and trying to move people to understanding that nuance is okay. One of the things that we do within Make Data Count is also to think about how do we standardize these with actual standards and efforts that bring people together around it's okay. Around how the standards are implemented within repositories, with the people who are working within the data space. So you can create a standard, but if nobody adopts it, it's not necessarily helping move the dialogue forward. So we have worked with groups like Counter on how do we define things such as page views and downloads, and then work with repository networks on how to implement those, and working with DataCite on then having a place for people to aggregate and bring those and expose them to the community. One of the things that I think we all agree with is like there's black boxes when it comes to metrics. People just we don't know how they are created. And one of the things that we're trying to do within Make Data Count is to make sure that as data metrics are being created, they're being done on information that is auditable and is open and transparent so people can challenge assumptions along the way. And this is important to not only have this out in the open, but also do it in a standardized way. So data usage is one piece of it, but there's also this idea of how do we evolve the world of data citation. So how do you, the connections between data outputs, the connections between those outputs and papers or software or other outputs, how do you collect that information and make it so that it's available for those to use? Some of us may remember that at one point about 10 years ago, there was a product that one company that we won't name came out that said, we have figured out a data citation corpus kind of, data index, and we can tell you the impact of all your data. So how well did that work out for everybody here, right? It's something that not only does it not work out, it's also the source information that underlies that. It's just not consistent. It's not reliable. And I think one of the things that we all as a community need to understand is the limitations that exist just within our space so that we kind of understand how much some of these companies and these products are just full of it, right? They don't actually deliver on what they're promising. One of the projects that we're doing within Make Data Count is called the Data Citation Corpus, which is actually bringing together a transparent corpus of connections that's available for anybody to openly use. And we have launched a Kaggle competition with using machine learning to comb publications for mentions of research data, to work within the reference lists of research, of publications to find mentions, and then making that information publicly available so that we all have a baseline open set of information that we can build from that is transparent, that is available, and that we know has information, that has credibility behind it. Okay, so that's all information about things that we do in this space around standards and infrastructure. We're also interested in advocacy, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today, is to talk about research assessment, how we can change the incentive structure around research data. We launched a working group with Helios Open, which is a project that's based on bringing cohorts of leadership from institutions in North America together to talk about change. And we looked at how can we bring resources to institutions so that we can change the way that people value research data and evolve tenure and promotion processes and evolve research assessment as a whole. And one of the things that we were able to do here is really talk about what is meaningful information that would help institutions understand what is needed And one of the things that I think we'll also touch on here is that peer networks are very important. Peer pressure is very important. So seeing that other institutions have actually done this, or understanding what the limitations are and seeing how people are experimenting with it, that is a way that we all can make change. And so the IDEA working group focused on how do you bring together a set of tools that will showcase how change can happen on your campus and how change has happened in other places. So if you follow that QR code, you'll see a resource center where there are case studies where institutions around the world have been looking at ways of evolving tenure and promotion to include research data. There's information about how you can include research data in your CV, how if you're reviewing somebody for tenure and promotion, how you would look at that and see examples of how institutions have actually done TMP review processes to incorporate research data. And there will be a maturity model that'll talk about how institutions can progress, departments can progress along the way about how to include research data in more meaningful ways within their TMP processes. And it's an evolving resource center that we're hoping will allow for people to really see, not just through us telling them, but through each other's peer networks, how this change can happen. And then one last thing I would just say is that a lot of the work that we're doing with the Make Data Count also is summed up in a PLOS article that we wrote. So if you want to do the QR code, 10 simple rules, very easily digestible article that talks through what are some 10 easy, or not easy, but 10 digestible, 10 easily understood, 10 digestible steps of how research data could be involved in the evolution of research assessment.
Just the QR code doesn't work.
This one?
Disabled, yeah. It said the QR code campaign has been disabled for some reason.
Oh, okay.
I tried twice.
All right, well, don't go to the QR code. Just go to the citation. This will give you another.
That's why DOIs exist,
That's why DOIs exist. Well, look into that. That's good to know. So I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you just do a Google search for 10 simple rules for recognizing data and software contributions and hiring, you should be able to find it for sure. Yeah.
A big round of applause. Thank you, Tom. We have two more presentations before we break for the coffee break. Now we move from Bianca. Bianca is active director of the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information, an initiative she helped organize and coordinate. She has a background in research communication and libraries, having worked at Scholarly Communication Open Science Librarian at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And before that, she's worked also at Sesame Open Science, and she keeps working in open science, open data, open infrastructure, combining the role she has on Barcelona Declaration. So thank you, Bianca. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. I just, while John was talking, took out all the animations out of my slide. So hopefully this will go a little bit more smoothly as it would otherwise have gone. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to also introduce the Barcelona Declaration. I want to give a little bit of background about what the Declaration is about, how it connects with the other initiatives for reforming research assessment, and what it actually entails and what we see in practice happening already. So when we talk about research information, we really talk about information about research. So it's not about open access, it's not about open data, it's not about other like open educational resources. Those are all very important, but a complementary discussion. This is really about metadata. This is about article metadata, information about who is conducting research, who is funding research, and how is research used. And why is that important? Because this is the information that is used for decision making by institutions, by governments, by funders, about priorities, about who to fund, about how to evaluate researchers and institutions. It's also used to assess the effect of policies, again by funders, by governments. And importantly, it's also used by researchers and societal stakeholders to find and assess research. When you use any bibliographic database, you are using metadata. So the more open that metadata is, the more easily you can find research and other people can find your research. and included in assessment. So why do we feel so strongly that that research information should be open? Well, first of all, when we are assessing researchers and institutions based on closed information, that's not transparent, also not to the ones being evaluated. So we would say that fair assessment requires full transparency. When we're making decisions based on information that's selective, that leaves out large parts of research, be it in other disciplines, be it in non-English speaking literature, then that's not really equitable. So we would say that equitable decision making requires inclusive data. And that's not to say that open data sources are by definition inclusive, although there are often, but it also means that with using open data you can combine more data sources and you're not reliant on what any one company or two companies that we won't name decide what counts. You are more in control yourself. And then finally, when we're monitoring and incentivizing open science, and we're doing that based on closed data, that doesn't really sit right. So I would say open science requires open research information. It's closely aligned with the other initiatives we heard about. DORA, as Jenny mentioned, was one of the first to really come out strongly and say that all citations need to be open, and having that in DORA was a big part of why that eventually happened, and all the citations in CoARA are now openly available. There's a really interesting history behind that when you talk about advocacy and effectiveness that we can talk a little bit more about. Also in CoARA, there's really focus also on ensuring the independence and transparency of the data and infrastructure used for research assessments. And also in the UNESCO recommendation of open science, it's also said that monitoring of open science should be under public oversight and supported by non-proprietary and transparent infrastructures. So what does it mean for researchers? Because when you think about research assessment, you're really thinking about what it means for researchers. It's about where information about research outputs and activities is located. Who can find and use that information around the world? What types of research inputs, research outputs and impacts are used in assessment and evaluation, and how open and transparent that assessment and the information that's used is. And also who owns and controls research information. That's about digital sovereignty. That's about the role, the responsibility of universities versus do you let other commercial companies take that control? I won't go through this whole slide, but just to highlight, when we talk about research assessment, on one hand, as we do today, when we talk about publishing reform, moving away again from impact factors, moving away perhaps also from just a singular model of peer review article as a mark of quality. When we diversify that, I would say that the transition to open research information really underlies both of these movements because it provides the transparency in the data and the information needed to make the other parts happen. So all that by introduction, and then what the Barcelona Declaration tried to do about this, it's really a call for institutions and funders. So far, this has often been a call towards publishers, an advocacy movement toward publishers. Make your publication, your article metadata openly available. That has been successful to some extent, but we feel that it requires the involvement of other actors in the system as well. So the Barcelona Declaration really calls upon research performing and funding organizations and organizations evaluating research to commit to making openness the default for the research information we use. So which databases do you license, which database do you use, but also the information you produce. To take responsibility that the output of your researchers is openly findable. Working with services and systems that support and enable open research information. That can be about publisher negotiations, that can be about choices, which systems you use yourself. supporting the sustainability of infrastructure. I think we're all very happy that we have something like COSAP and DataScience, Make Data Count, OpenAlex, OpenAir. But these initiatives don't sustain themselves. They only can work and function and develop if they're both used and supported. And then finally, support collective action. Because this is not just something that each individual organization needs to figure out by itself. It's really an area where collaboration can really help. And I should add, also where that collective action can help is to make sure that we don't impose a European or North American perspective, but we really take into account the perspectives of other regions of the world. And we're, I think, like DORA and CoARA, are having those conversations with what does it look like in Latin America or Southeast Asia? What's different about the system that is important to take into account and to include in these efforts? So I'll briefly skip the count of signatories. Like DORA and CoARA, we originated from Europe, so we have many signatories there, but we also have a large active representation in Latin America, with Daniela Peralta, who you'll hear about later, being in our steering committee. We also have a lot of supporters, the infrastructures, the data providers that make this all possible. And some good examples of what this could, thank you, what this could look like in practice. Universities unsubscribing from Web of Science or Scopus. The Leiden ranking, which is a university ranking, but they transition to fully open data. So it's more transparent, and you can also have a more informed decision about these university rankings. And from other parts of the world, in Africa, an initiative to move beyond just DOIs and have a more equitable system of identifiers connected to, but not dependent on DOIs. And in Latin America, like Ferencia repository infrastructure, who recently gained support to further develop how they deal with metadata. I think we can discuss this later. What can your organization do? As I said, move away from closed databases, consider the systems you use yourself, participate in governance of these open infrastructures. Include open metadata in publisher negotiations if you have those negotiations, and consider not contributing institutional information to closed rankings. I'm sure we get to talk about that. I won't talk about our working groups, I won't talk about our national networks, I won't even talk about the conference, but I will say that signing the Barcelona Declaration is not a legal obligation. It doesn't expect you to already do all these things, because then we wouldn't need the declaration to start with, and the commitment, the community to start with. But it's really about commitment to change, to support also the research evaluation changes. Because again, fair assessment requires full transparency, equitable decision making requires inclusive data, and open science monitoring requires open research information. Thank you.
You can leave that there because the next speaker is online and it's quite late for her in Argentina. I want to say it's around 10 p.m. maybe. Daniela will join us on the screen soon. She's the coordinator of the Latin American Forum on Research Assessment, FOLAC, at CLACSO, where she leads regional efforts in Latin America to advance responsible research assessment, open science, and non-commercial scholarly communication in the Global South. There she is in the screen, and she'll share her screen as well. She's an independent researcher at CONICET at the University of Buenos Aires, and serves as Secretary of Development and Institutional Engagement at the Universidad Nacional de las Artes. Disculpa por mi español muy malo, Daniela. Peralta has held key leadership roles in higher education, internationalization, and policy, including as National Director of International Cooperation at Argentina's Ministry of Education. And her research focuses on internationalization of higher education, regional integration, and geopolitics of knowledge. Quite important topic. Thank you, Daniela. Muchas gracias. You have your 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Today is still the 1st of June here in Argentina. It's 11 p.m. almost, and I am deeply sorry for not giving you all a big hug due to some health and family issues. Well, so good morning for you, and thank you very much for the invitation. Well, first I would like to apologize for not being able to join you in person. So this is why I'm participating remotely. Nevertheless, I am really pleased to contribute to this important conversation. I am the current coordinator of the Latin American Forum on Research Assessment, aka FOLEC, an initiative of the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, CLACSO. So FOLEC was created in 2019. I was the first coordinator before going to the ministry. As a regional platform bringing together universities, research institutions, funding agencies, journals, repositories, and scholars interested in transforming research assessment systems in Latin America and the Caribbean. Before FOLEC existed, there was already a vibrant movement defending knowledge as a public good, and there was also a growing sense that prevailing research assessment systems were failing to recognize the diversity, the social relevance, and the contextual nature of scientific work. This is why FOLEC became a platform through which voices could meet, dialogue, and they could have dialogue, and they could build consensus around the need for a more democratic, equitable, and socially relevant approach to research assessments. So we try to bring all of this together. Our work is based on a simple premise. Research assessment is not a technical issue purely. It is mainly a political, institutional, and epistemological question because it shapes how knowledge is valued, how researchers build their careers, and which scientific agendas are prioritized. Today, I would like to share two aspects of FOLEC's works. First, the principles that are expressed in the Bogotá Manifiesto, and second, some implementation strategies that seek to move from principles to practice. So this presentation explores the relationship between responsible research assessment and open science. In Latin America, we increasingly see these agendas as deeply interconnected. It is difficult to imagine meaningful open science without changes in the evaluation systems, and it is equally difficult to reform research assessment without strengthening open and non-commercial knowledge infrastructures. So, FOLEC understands responsible research assessment as a perspective that recognizes the plural nature of scientific activity. Rather than relying on a limited set of quantitative indicators, it promotes evaluation processes that are formative, transparent, contextualized, and sensitive to disciplinary and institutional diversity. This means valuing different research outputs, different trajectories, and different forms of contribution to science and society. In 2025, last year, after a big conference of CLACSO, FOLEC coordinated a broad regional consultation that resulted in the Manifiesto de Bogotá, or Bogotá Manifiesto. The manifiesto seeks to translate the general principles of responsible research assessment into a concrete framework adapted to the realities of Latin America and the Caribbean. It is rooted in ideas such as cognitive justice, epistemic diversity, democratic participation, and the social relevance of knowledge. So the first group of principles, of these guiding principles, focuses on the ethical foundations of science. This includes social justice, linguistic and cultural diversity, recognition of collective and collaborative knowledge production, and the right of society to participate in and benefit from scientific progress. So this idea of that the right to science is both an individual right and a collective right. For us, assessment systems should not only measure outputs, they should reinforce these broader values. The second group of principles address two central challenges. First, the democratization of knowledge through open and non-commercial infrastructures. And second, the transformation of assessment models themselves through contextualized indicators, qualitative approaches, gender equity, inclusion, and new forms of academic recognition. These principles move beyond the traditional focus on publication and citation as the primary indicators of excellence. So this open, free, and non-commercial access, what does this mean? So this principle reflects a distinctive feature of the Latin American experience. For decades, the region has invested in publicly funded non-commercial infrastructures such as Cielo, Redalic, América, Latindex, and La Referencia. The manifesto argues that publicly funded research should be openly available through infrastructures governed as a public goods rather than commercial assets. This is not only an access issue, it is also a matter of scientific sovereignty and long-term sustainability. Here in this slide, we argue that assessment systems themselves should become more transparent and participatory. Evaluation criteria should be adapted to disciplinary, linguistic, institutional, and territorial diversity. We also advocate for broader participation of the academic communities and relevant societal actors in the assessment process. In other words, assessments should become more open, cooperative, and accountable. This slide, beyond commercial metrics and rankings. So this principle addresses one of the most debated issues globally. FOLEC does not reject indicators entirely. Rather, we question the excessive dependence on commercial metrics, impact factors, H indexes, and global rankings as proxies for quality. We advocate for a balanced approach combining expert judgment, qualitative assessment, and contextualized indicators that better reflect local priorities and societal contributions. This is particularly important for regions and disciplines like social sciences and the humanities that are often underrepresented in dominant international databases. So here, for those who are interested in exploring these ideas further, the complete text of the Bogota Manifesto is available through this QR code, and I hope it works. We hope it can contribute to ongoing international discussions on responsible research assessment. So this slide summarizes perhaps the most important message of the presentation. Open science and responsible assessment are mutually reinforcing. Open science cannot flourish if researchers continue to be rewarded primarily for publishing in a limited set of high-impact journals. At the same time, responsible assessment requires open infrastructures, transparent processes, open peer review, and broader access to research outputs. And Bianca has pointed out this perfectly. In short, these are not separate agendas. They are part of the same transformation. So we have one of our main initiatives. So principles are important, but implementation is essential. One of FOLEC's main current initiative is the Research Assessment Academy. The Academy is designed for policymakers, university leaders, evaluators, and research managers. The overall goal is to build practical capacities for implementing responsible and contextualized assessment systems. We see training and institutional learning as critical components of reform. We are trying to get into the socialization of norms and create this culture, this new culture of evaluation. So additional information about the Academy is available through this QR code, and we welcome collaboration with institutions and networks that are interested in developing similar capacity building initiatives. And I have 20 seconds. So in 20 seconds, I would say, let me conclude with these three brief messages. First, research assessment reform is a global movement, but implementation must be sensitive to regional realities. And I'm really happy to be not in person, but discussing this in the Asia Pacific region. Second, responsible assessment and open science should be advanced together rather than separate agendas. And third, Latin America and the Caribbean do not only seek to adopt international reforms through initiatives such as FOLEC and the Bogota Manifesto. The region also seeks to contribute with ideas, experiences, and institutional innovations to the global debate. We consider ourselves as agenda settings actors, so I'm really happy to be here. So thank you very much for your attention, and I really look forward for the discussion, and I am only 40 seconds past the... And this is a lot for me, because I always talk too much.
Thank you, Daniela. Indeed, we have that tendency as Latin Americans to talk too much.
Yes.
I should say that unfortunately, Daniela is not in person here, so she will not be joining the panel later on. So the idea was that we hear from all of them, and then we have a chance to ask questions and discussions and everything. So now, before Daniela goes to bed, because it's now midnight almost, anyone has questions for Daniela before we let her go? So that's the only part of questions that will happen now, and then most of the questions we'll have for the panel discussion. Anyone wants to have a burning question? Yes, Francis. Maria will bring you the mic. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much. It's Francis Crawley from Leuven in Belgium. That was great. I wanted to ask one question, because I think this is really important also here in Asia. What are the resistances that you find when you go and you talk to different institutions and so forth in Latin America for, let's say, embracing or getting involved with this reform of research assessment? What are the hurdles that you have to overcome? And how do you go about that dialogue in order to make it happen in that circumstance? So, thank you.
Thank you. I didn't hear really good your name, but I think that to answer that question, we should start from the last part of the presentation. We realized that the best advocacy strategy we have is trying to sell in the good way the academy assessment. There is the academy, the research assessment academy, because there is room for there is a lot of unease. I mean, unease regarding research evaluation criteria has been ongoing for more than 10, 12 years. But there was nothing to fulfill that unease until we started with this process. The main resistance is how are you going to measure this, because the implementation, the evaluation processes of researchers is a long process. It costs money, and you need the people, you need the indicators. So that's the most difficult part. This is why we are talking about changing the culture of evaluation, trying to get to the policy at the high level policy makers with this research assessment institution. We build this dialogue, and sometimes, and we have really nice experiences of some scientific councils trying to pursuing their own reform. In Argentina, we have a chapter of reform with the previous administration of CONICET, for example. We have the FOLEC was created in Mexico with the CONACYT, with this current, because it's the same party that is ruling Mexico before Sheinbaum. We have the previous president was of the same party, so we have this continuity, but resistance coming from some parts of the research agencies or the research bodies of the government, and sometimes from some evaluators that think it is impossible to fulfill that evaluation because they don't have time, because they need something more tangible, more that they can create. So this is why discussing research reform and open science as a whole, it's really important. So for us, it's not about the money, it's not about the legitimacy of a new indicator, even though we build on that. It's about changing culture. And this is why we are now talking about the School of the Assessment, academia, and trying to enter through that part of the debate. That would be one part of the question.
Yes. Anyone has a final question for her? I hear about capacity building a lot, Daniela, also with our African colleagues, and it's not an unwillingness to change, but also then if I don't do what I'm doing now, what do I do then? And then how can I have capacity to do this new thing? So the Academy is a great initiative. We have another question for you before we go to the break.
Hello, my name is Marcelo. I'm your neighbor from Brazil.
Wait a minute, is it working? Do you hear?
Yes, I hear Marcelo.
Okay, good.
And this month we cannot speak about football at all.
If I understood the question from Francis is, if we in Latin America had weight to push these changes, because these are coming from Europe or the United States for a reason, because they are the main market or the main producers. So we think we have weight or muscle power to change it or impose our open science. Thank you.
So the question will be if I think we have like the power to change, how we can build on that. Let me try to rephrase because I didn't fully understand your question. How we can be an agenda setting and how we can change rules. That will be the question.
Yes. Yes.
You can say it in Portuguese. It is better for you.
It's the mic.
Okay.
Just once.
Okay. No, if it was like if you have weight, like because we're a small market, so we feel small community, smaller than Europe. If you can.
That our community is smaller than Europe. That's the.
If I may, perhaps Marcelo's trying.
Giovanna, yes. What is he trying to say?
So he's asking what's the influence Latin America can have in changing the landscape, considering we have a smaller system than other regions in the world, and also that we don't control the resources that are shaping that system. So how can Latin America change things?
Okay, I got.
Yeah, without being.
Well, I am fully enthusiastic of the agenda setting power Latin American have, because in practice we have been doing this for more than 15 years if you consider as well the open access movement. And if you look really deep, I mean, I'm a researcher as well. First I was a researcher and now I don't know where I am. But we have this two-folded system, for example, in CONICET, I have the metrics that are global metrics, and I have to publish group journals number 1, number 2, number 3, like Wallis you have in Brazil, or they're different in another country, but this global metric with this commercial interest of these journals and journals. But then the legitimacy of our research and our circulation has always been regional, Latin American. So we have these two systems always working together, and it's really it's a terrible task to fulfill both things at the same time. So this is why I don't think we can leverage, because we are a small. I am not going to be so polite today. I don't think that because we are a smaller system within the world, we don't have agency power, because we can change, and we have been trying to put some conversation at the global levels all the time, since the 50s. And I think, for example, with the higher education movement, we've been able to create a movement, have our conferences, and go to UNESCO and say, higher education is a human right, blah, 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 blah. And they were doing the same with this. So what happens to me is that it's not that we are a small system, but we need to make this system, even if it is small for the world, works for us. So this is our main motto from Latin America. And with this conversation, we can talk with other regions and share our vision and share the way we're thinking about this and trying to push for change. And I do believe we have agenda setting power, even though we are a smaller system, because now there are other regions of the world that echo what we have been saying for the last 10, 15 years. So this is my answer to the question. I think we do have, I'm from international relations as well, so even smaller countries can change the global governance in different issues, and this one particularly, I think we can do it.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and thank you for the questions. And now it's time for our coffee break. We will come back at 10:40, so we have how do you call it, the watch right here. So we'll have 15 minutes, almost 20 minutes of coffee break. And then we will reconvene to hear what's happening here in Asia. So we will hear from, we heard from global initiatives, we heard what's happening in Latin America now with Daniela, and then we will hear what's happening in the region. Any questions before we go? We all know where we want to go. We go to the coffee break on the right-hand side, and then bathroom if you need, the women on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. A big round of applause to Daniela and to everyone.
Thank you.
Wishing you all the best for your recovery.
Yes, I'm drinking tea and now I have my medicine.
Bye, have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you for your presentation. I keep doing it. Sorry. You will have more time for more nice conversations. We will now, we started our journey. We were traveling the world with DORA and CoARA in Latin America, and then we heard about sectoral initiatives and focus initiatives with Make Data Count. We have also Research Software Alliance in the room, and we have other initiatives in the room that also are focusing on one aspect of research assessment. And then we heard also then from Bianca on research data. So we were in the meta level, let's say. We were in the principles, in the policies, and the practical tools to implementation, but we were not actually on the ground hearing what's happening. And this is what we're going to do now. Each speaker I will invite will have 15 minutes to tell us how they have been implementing responsible research assessment. And we're kicking off with Australia. So I will invite Professor Tina Cockburn, who is a professor of law in the School of Law at Queensland University of Technology. She's also the director of, I don't know how these people have so many titles and jobs, how many hours do they have in their day? Because not only she's the professor of law, she's also the director of the Australian Centre for Health Law Research. She co-leads the ACHLR Planning for Health Aging program. She's a sessional member of Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and a member of the Queensland Law Society Health and Disability Law Committee. So her health law research focuses on access to justice and compensation by vulnerable people in patient safety, compensation and redress, and elder disability. And she is chair of the QT Reimagining Research Assessment Working Group, and we will hear about that. She was chair until 24, and she's been a member of the steering committee since August 24, and actually chair since November 25. Tina, thank you for taking us to Australia. The floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Thank you all. I'm so fascinated. I learned so much in the early presentations. This is my university, the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. So my presentation is going to be very practical and hopefully quite simple and straightforward. I'm really going to talk about what we've done at QUT over the last 5 years or so, implementing responsible research assessment. And hopefully, by demonstrating the process that we went through at QUT, it'll give some inspiration for others that want to, at an institutional level, implement responsible research practice. Series of 4 phases, and we've been working on these since 2021. So change is not fast, and it is iterative too. It's really important, I think, to acknowledge that. I also do want to acknowledge a person here in the room, Professor Jenny Barber, who has been a leader at our university in this space. So, as I said, this is going to be a very, very practical talk about what we've actually done. So the first phase in implementing reimagining research assessment at QUT was to build the foundations. So initially we looked at the case for reform of research assessment. That was accepted by the university, and a working group was established. Importantly, that working group had very broad cross-university representation, not just of the faculties, but also divisions of the university. A critical part of this phase was to review the leading international instruments and map still the key principles and map that against what we were actually doing at QUT. Our research quality agenda, for example, the Australian Career Framework, and our Indigenous research strategy. From that, we were able to identify the gaps in our current practices and the opportunities for reform, but also importantly, the risks that might be associated with, as we often used to say in the university meetings, the risks of doing reform, but also, importantly, the risks of not engaging in reform. So that working group then engaged in a process of designing what reform might look like at QUT, and we developed a discussion paper which outlined the principles and actions that we were going to engage in. That phase really involved a lot of engagement and consultation with the deans, with the directors of research, and also all the research leaders across the university, because this process really does require buy-in. You can't impose down on researchers. So that collaborative process was really and consultation process was really quite critical. Ultimately, that led to endorsement from the University Research Committee and the University Research Academic Board. And the significant part of this phase really was that QUT became a signatory to DORA. QUT was the second university in Australia to sign DORA, and a very important part of that for QUT was that on the main research page there's a public acknowledgement of QUT's commitment to responsible research assessment. I'll show you in a moment the principles that we developed that are obviously, when you see them, they're based on the international instruments, but they're relevant to our university and our research and researchers. So you can see the key issues that arose from that process were concerns from the disciplines, the HAS disciplines, the science disciplines, about having discipline-specific assessment approaches, not just a one-size-fits-all. The role and the appropriate use of metrics, often the language we were hearing in the early days, we don't hear it anymore actually, was throwing the baby out with the bathwater, getting rid of metrics. We don't hear that anymore. It's all about, obviously, the portfolio of research assessment tools. Metrics is one, the importance of contextualising, and thinking about the funders, our key funders in Australia are the Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council. Critical to this phase in particular was the high-level support of our Vice-Chancellor and then Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research. as part of that process, as I said, we made a public commitment to responsible research assessment. We, as part of that, coming out of that mapping process, we developed these 7 principles, which I've summarised on that, on that slide, and that actually appears on our main research page. That was a really important step for us to have that. I mean, that looks pretty basic and simple, but the process of developing those was over a very long period of time with a lot of consultation. Once we got the principles in place, and I think this is the universities, isn't it? We then had to have an action and implementation plan, which again was a result of a lot of extensive consultation. That high-level plan included those starting from mapping the principles along the site and then the actions, responsible areas, who was accountable in the executive leadership team, and a timeline. The implementation of that plan, once it was approved, was critically involved forming a high-level steering group. We talked about how we would really send a very clear message that this is how PUT evaluates research, by having the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research as the chair of the steering group. I'm actually acting chair at the moment because we're in a period of transition with the DVC research. So as part of the implementation and engagement process, we then have now, as I said, have got this steering group. Critically, because of the idea here of recognising and valuing and celebrating the diversity of not only researchers and research outputs, we formed a non-traditional research outputs working group. I want to change the name because it's not, it's perfect research, non-traditional research outputs. That obviously outputs in addition to journal articles. We also wanted to have an evidence base about what the perceptions of research quality were at our institution, so that we could identify gaps for training, of course, but also so we can see how far we come once these steps are implemented. There was training and we're also doing some focus groups, which I think all the focus groups have been done now, we're just going to write them up. And as part of this phase 2, there's been a lot of external and sector engagement, including we're really proud that we've been profiled by DORA as a case study. And the other important and incredible initiative has been that we've got a national community of practice, which we co-launched with the University of Melbourne. The University of Melbourne is the other signatory to DORA in Australia. Of course, that community of practice engages with all the different ways and different principles of research assessment. We've been having regular meetings of that community of practice as well, to have some sector-wide buy-in and also understanding and learning from each other. Just briefly to show you in a minute, if it ever comes up, this research quality survey. It's just interesting. I mean, you would guess this is what researchers would think, but it is really helpful to have some data on it. So people believe that there should be multi-dimensional and contextual indicators of quality, that there's too much reliance on metrics, that type of peer review, narrative approaches, journal impact factors are problematic, low awareness of DORA and other ways of evaluating research. People were familiar with non-traditional research outputs, but they wanted some support, and there was advocacy for including non-traditional research outputs as part of our measures of research. So that's been really instructive, particularly for our education and training. Just some brief notes on the national community of practice. We established that, as I said, with the University of Melbourne. We've got now 8 members across the country. We've deliberately tried to engage the diversity of institutions as well, regional universities, the group of 8 research technology universities, northern states and territories of Australia. So we have 8 member universities in the community practice now, and increasing interest. So you can see on the screen, I won't read through them, the goals of that national community of practice. Oops, I think I've gone to the end. Sorry. All right, so the next phase, I guess we're not, whoops, it's giving away all the really good stuff at the end. The next phase is going to, of course, be just embedding and integrating responsible research assessment into our systems at QUT, and in particular, all those reporting systems. We have gone a little bit way down the track with that by there's a kind of a warning on the dashboards that this metric, or whatever metric it's showcasing, is just one metric and it needs to be contextualised. But we still have a bit of way to go on that. So getting the systems all aligning. Importantly, and really important, I heard a comment before about the importance of research assessment for institutions, for research groups, for researchers, and the careers of researchers. So particularly reviewing and updating the, what we call it, the academic career framework on recruitment, tenure, conversations and promotions is also going to be a key aspect of that, because obviously whatever we're reporting is what people are going to focusing on. And continuing, of course, with sharing practices across not only the university but sector-wide, and me coming to meetings like this so that I can learn and share what I learned. So I think this phased approach has been a thoughtful and slow engagement approach has been really critical to getting some buy-in and socialising the agenda. But as I said, it's not a quick process. We started all this in 2025. We're not even evaluating it yet because we haven't finished. So what's some lessons? What's next from what we've learnt as we've been embedding this is that it's really critical, of course, for high-level leadership buy-in. You have to have principles, but of course they need to be supported by system and process change. Consultation is key. That's what builds the trust. That also, you ask a question, you get answers and you can't ignore them. So, I mean, it does create complexities and it slows things down. But it slows them down in a good way, because then there's opportunities for responding and fixing things, but also education and training. This was a really big thing, the discipline-specific approaches. It's not even, once we get a framework, it's obviously not a one-size-fits-all. You have to then give autonomy to disciplines to then, in their discipline context, to embed the broad principles, the importance of training and guidance. And as we keep on saying, it's a very iterative and long-term process. Suggestion for a roadmap, if anyone's thinking of doing this. This is actually really important, this very first step, building the case aligned with strategy. Obviously that's easier, particularly now because of all the wonderful work that's been done around the world. I mean, all someone has to do is come to that first session that we had this morning, and it's very clear why there should be reform of research assessment. But building that case and aligning it and mapping it against the existing strategies is the way that you get institutional support. A cross-institutional working group, mapping the current practice, not only of course against DORA, but other ways of reimagining research assessment. the consultation, developing principles, implementation, embedding into policy systems and processes, getting the university management on board, and the investment in training and ongoing review. So I try to keep that to time. I'm happy in the panel we can talk some more. And it is also important to do the acknowledgements, which I hope you'll understand. Yeah. So my colleagues at QUT, but of course particularly Jenny and the current Research Strategy Officer, Alana Bollington, before her Jess, and the groups that I've been working with. This presentation is largely based on the QUT case study, so that's on the DORA website. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tina. And I will invite now Alan to get mic'd up and not choked on your lanyard. Alan is taking us to New Zealand. So Alan is the manager of the contestable investments at New Zealand's Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment. In this capacity, he manages New Zealand's largest contestable science investment, the Endeavour Fund, which invests up to 230 million annually in New Zealand money in excellent science, with the potential to positively impact New Zealand's economy, environment, and society. As a former researcher himself and research leader, Alan has had his research proposals assessed, performed as a member of the MBIE's College of Assessors, and now he's managing the college in their assessment process for the Endeavour Fund. Thank you, Alan. 15 minutes.
Thank you. So, kia ora koutou, in New Zealand, te reo Māori, that means good health, everyone. So thank you so much for inviting me here. We appreciate that. So this is a New Zealand perspective. I've put some New Zealand icons up there, a map and our flag, because there's some really important contextual things about New Zealand. So we are a country of 5 million people, so that's the size of Singapore or Sydney, and a landmass which is the same size as the archipelago of Japan or Great Britain. So we're quite small, and we're very spread out. When we talk about where we sit in international context, we have very modest amounts of funding, so we are very resource constrained, and that shapes everything we do. Having said that, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment is New Zealand's largest funder of public good science. So we are equivalent to the Australian Research Council or the National Science Foundation, which again, contextualising, says that we're a mouse compared to an elephant. But as the government funding agency, we don't have to get anybody on board, we make the rules. So when we want to talk about responsible research and assessment, we say, this is how you're doing it. So a little bit about this is about how we've done it. I'll just give you a little bit of the background on science funding, the contextual piece again, briefly touch on the Endeavour Fund, which is the main fund that we perform research assessments in, and some of the things that we've done recently, 2 things in assessment reforms, and just talking about the big picture in New Zealand at the moment, which is, like a lot of countries, we are undergoing a reform in science funding, moving to a more strategy-based, top-down system of purchasing science. Right, there we go. So the contextual, $1 billion is this total government spend on science, good science in New Zealand. We are not just the smallest funder of science by the OECD standards, we're also the smallest per capita investor in science by the OECD. So when I talk about a resource-constrained, funding-constrained environment, that is the environment we work in. Nonetheless, we managed to run a number of different funds, and they're graphically represented on here, which you won't be able to read, but broadly speaking, we have 2 axes on this graph. So investigator-led or discovery-led science is down that end, industry-led or commercially-led science is on this end, and then this axis is negotiated, so co-developed research between the purchaser and the provider on this side versus a fully contestable system down this end. And you can see that we have a range of funds that kind of map that spectrum to some extent or another. And so the context of most of this presentation is this block down here, the Endeavour Fund, which I manage. It sits somewhere between investigator-led and industry-led, kind of what mission-led, and it's fully contestable. So this is off our website if you want to go and read the words, and it's important for New Zealand. So there are two mechanisms within the Endeavour Fund, which is a small grant of $1 million for over 2 to 3 years called Smart Ideas, and a larger grant for research programs which are between 3 to 5 years. It's actually unlimited, but the amount of money we have available will fund about 12 million on average per research program. And we have 2 assessment bodies that make the final decision for Endeavour, and this is speaking to the pre-reform process. So we have our college assessors, which performs research assessment in the traditional way, and then we have a strategic panel at the end of it called the Science Board, who performs a more strategic analysis of the research assessment results. Now, so that's the context. So our general assessment approach within the Endeavour Fund is a holistic expert analysis of excellence, which is split up into 2 categories: science, the what and the how, and then the team, which is a little bit of the who and the how. So this is very much qualitative, is our direction to our assessors. The second part is looking at impact, so the potential to generate wealth for New Zealand is the primary thing that we're looking for here. Split up into 2 categories as well. The benefit to New Zealand, which is akin to a business case, how much money are you going to make? And what we call the pathway to implementation, which is akin to a business plan, how are you actually going to make that money post-research contract? And just thinking about some of the things that we've spoken about this morning in terms of responsible research assessment. One of the impediments that we struggle with a little bit is we provide information for our college assessors for them to read, speaking to these principles of responsible assessment, not using metrics, being qualitative rather than quantitative. But the assessors by and large don't read the instructions. We publish a set of videos to make it really easy for them to understand what the requirements are. We provide a set of research guidelines, but we know that only 17% of our College of Assessors watch the videos. We do a post-round survey to find out what they found useful or not useful from our instructions. We get a response rate of 30%. And so what that tells us is that we can be dictatorial as the funder and say, this is how you shall do research assessment, but they don't read the instructions. So that's one of our big challenges. All right, so within that, that's the challenge. So one of our assessment reforms is about right-sizing our assessment for the size of the fund. So I spoke to the Smart Ideas mechanism, it's $1 billion. Up until a couple of years ago, the proposal, the grant writing requirements for a Smart Idea was very, very similar to that for a research program, for less than 1/10 of the amount of funding. So that's inefficient in terms of researcher time, of institution time, and in terms of government resource time to preparing, writing, reading, assessing proposals for quite a small amount of money. So we made a conscious decision to right-size the assessment approach for the size of the fund. And that meant a number of things. So the first one was to move the assessment process from a 2-stage to a 1-stage. To help manage the demand, we had an EOI stage. But that means you needed to write and assess 2 different proposals, reduced to a 1-stage process with a simplified proposal So that was easier to write, easier to assess. That reduced costs to us and the applicant organisations, and the aim was to reduce oversubscription. How did we reduce oversubscription given that the funding constraints are probably greater than ever at the moment? Well, we simply went to an institutional cap on applicants. So rather than having a completely open process and then using an EOI stage to do first stage screening, we simply went to each institution and said, based on your past history of success, we think your capacity for submitting fundable research proposals is about this. That's the number we're going to accept from you. And the way that we worked this out was, if your history of, if in the last 3 years your average number of successful applications was 3, we apply and multiply to that, so 9, that's the number we'll accept, because you know you're not going to be successful in everything you put through, but we don't want you submitting 13. So as a point of reference, every year we fund about 45 smart ideas. That's the size of the fund. Our largest university, the University of Auckland, typically submits 70 applications. So they're competing with themselves, even if they were the only ones that were successful. So putting a cap on applications really did make the process more efficient for everybody. And we also reduced the number of assessors. And again, this is talking about right sizing. So prior to introducing this change, for both the excellence and impact stage, we had 3 specialist assessors for each stage, 3 for excellence, 3 for impact. In the interest of right sizing, so actually, why don't we get just 3 assessors in total? We look at both excellence and impact. And the results were actually quite encouraging, which was most of the assessors felt that they were perfectly capable of assessing adequately both excellence and impact, whereas previously our premise was either you look at the science or you look at the impact, and we had different parts of the college that did each. So that was the ideas reform. And then the second one, which I suspect my colleague Joanne Moyer, come across her in previous meetings, has spoken to you about, and it is a case study on our website, but it was a big piece of work for us because we rolled out a new narrative CV template for all our applications. So CV, just make sure we're talking the same language, curriculum, VK, or resume if you're from the US. So we went from a kind of traditional academic CV to a kind of a co-designed narrative CV. And one of the main drivers for this is that in New Zealand, funding Indigenous research is very important to our government priorities, and we identified that traditional academic CVs don't work very well for Indigenous researchers. They don't necessarily have a standard academic career, which that means they don't necessarily have the same metrics when assessed. They may have had career breaks, they may be in non-traditional roles. And so the narrative CV was really tailored to help Indigenous researchers and Indigenous end users better showcase what their depth and breadth of expertise was for the assessors in a more qualitative sense than a traditional academic CV. So it was first introduced in 2023. In 105 of our assessments, the applicants included at least one narrative CV as part of their proposal. Sorry, of 105 that were assessed, 49 included at least one narrative CV. And of those, 7 were funded, which was actually a reasonably good success rate compared to a traditional CV. We followed up with a stakeholder survey. So this was researchers and assessors. How well did the narrative CV work for them? And the results were overwhelmingly positive. They gave us confidence that the narrative CV was working in the way that we intended. It helped Indigenous researchers better showcase their experiences, and it also provided assessors with a more rounded view of the strengths and weaknesses of the individual that was submitting the narrative CV. So I talked a little bit about this in the lead up. So, like a lot of countries, New Zealand is going through a science system reform at the moment. This is our biggest reform to our science funding system in 30 years. And it's following a lot of Western nations and taking a much more strategic, top-down approach to making science funding decisions, because we're all working in more resource-constrained environments than ever before. So governments want to know that they are spending every dollar the way they want to spend it. So what this means is that we've established 2 new advisory decision bodies to help implement that strategy. There's been a top-down production of a science investment plan that all research applications must follow, and assessments must follow. And there's an increased focus on impact and commercialisation. Where is the challenge here for responsible research assessment? As we're trying to push through change for responsible research, that's kind of a bottom-up approach to best practice. But then there's a collision with top-down, which is actually strategy is really important. We don't care how you do it. These are the things we want to fund. So we're going through a process of saying, yes, the government gets to decide because they pay my salary on what the approach to funding is in a top-down sense. But we need to be able to ensure ourselves that we're still following those best practice responsible research goals. But they are in more conflict when you have a much more top-down strategic approach to science funding. So that's a thought to leave you with. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Alan. And now for our final speaker of the Tales from the Frontline, we will hear from Japan. We'll go to Kyoto University with Yu Sasaki, who is a research administrator at the Kyoto University Office of Research Acceleration. She focuses on advancing research assessment reform that maximizes the unique strengths and contexts of diverse academic disciplines. To this end, she actively engages with national and international networks of research managers to explore and adapt RRA practices as exemplified in the leadership of the DORA Fund GIMSA project, DORA funded GIMSA project. She is appointed as an associate member of the Subcommittee on Research Evaluation of the Science Council of Japan, and she contributes to national debates on research assessment. She also works with international researchers and facilitates academic collaborations, particularly with India. And she holds a PhD in political science, so she's a colleague from the social sciences. Thank you, Yu. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so it is my pleasure to be here. My name is Yu Sasaki, and I've been listening online and attending online meetings of DORA in the past 7-8 years. So it is my pleasure to be finally physically, meeting and contributing. Yeah, and let me just introduce ourselves first. We represent the Office of Research Acceleration of Kyoto University, and this is a joint presentation with my colleagues Asana Kano and Hiroshi Suzume. And together we designed this new assessment system at our university. But this journey was not an independent one, and as Giovanna explained, this Jinsha network, which is the research administrators network across Japan on social science and humanities, we worked closely with them and got DORA community grant to make this issue map to understand and locate the specific problems related to responsible research assessment in Japan in the context of science and humanities. So these debates and the accumulation of network knowledge helped develop this system at our university, and also the engagement with Science Council of Japan, of course. And also within our university, luckily we had leadership support And one of them was from including Susumu Kitagawa, who is a chemist vice president of our university, and he happened to be the Nobel laureate from last year chemistry. And every time he goes to the interview, he mentioned about this assessment system or the specific feature of the, I explain later, of system. So that helped in a way to navigate through this really complex journey of convincing so many stakeholders, etc., etc. Right. And before going to explaining our institutional initiatives, I want to explain a little bit about the background. Japanese universities were corporatized in 2004, and as probably same in the other region, that promised the institutional autonomy, but in reality it worked in a different way. And with increased dependency on the, less dependency on the block grant, and then more dependency on the competitive funding. And through those competitive funding, there was, as a result, these key performance indicators were penetrated from the macro policy level to the individual researcher level. And this seems to be happening in other parts of the world, and suggested by Neil Hans. He is from Sweden, I understand. And he argues that how the macro level metrics used at the national evaluation system trickle down to the micro level, shaping researcher behavior. And metrics, as shared by colleagues, not neutral, they are performative, shaping behavior across levels. So at every level, people are making conscious decision to use it. And another difference I would like to highlight is the work of Shaw and Wright about audit culture. And here's the definition. And even in academia, we witness this audit culture normalizes managerialism and turning accountability into internalized self-discipline, and where researchers are forced to become audit-ready subjects. And I guess this is the very mechanism behind this autonomy erosion at the institutional level. So when we introduce our reforms at the principal level, it's okay, but then when it comes to reality of how things are actually changing, then there's lots of resistance, of course, voices that the narrative or formative assessment is too subjective and might undermine research quality. But we must be aware that metrics too are not neutral or objective or automatically, doesn't promise automatic way to achieve excellence. And so this resistance itself is in fact very much a product of audit culture, we believe. And that's internalized within ourselves. And altering this is a huge challenge, but we realize that there are many possibilities along this journey too. So we want to ask if evaluation shapes research behavior, can universities reshape research assessment, or can they reclaim autonomy at the meso level? That is how common comes in. So this is the university level initiative, and it is a deliberate attempt to shift the focus from centralized metric-based control to narrative-based, dialogical, and formative system. And I wanted to map a different countries' system, but then this mapping, and then I gave up, I'm sorry. But we, as you know, that we want to a similar kind of system as the Dutch system, or maybe closer to Finnish system. So that's what we appreciate this international. Okay, so what is common? Common is a new research assessment system being introduced the research unit, research organization level at Kyoto University. It promotes formative assessment based on the visions and goals set by each research unit itself and on the dialogue at all levels. Does not allow comparison among research units or among different disciplines based on a single set of metrics. And this is basically the same thing, but importantly, this is also used partially for internal fund allocation. That is the challenge and the constraints, so to say, that we have. So we can talk about that a bit more in detail later. And it is not a metric focused system and also not an individual researcher assessment. So I guess many cases discussed here is linked to individual research assessments, but ours is at the research unit level assessment. And it doesn't include teaching exercises, really research. So how we develop this system, it is still a development stage. And so far, if you look back, the direct journey started in 2024 when we organized a symposium about university reform and RRA. And we had James Wilson from Raleigh as a guest speaker, and we discussed the RRA with officials from Ministry of Higher Education also were invited, and we involved senior management and early career researchers to represent their voices as well. So this was like a raise kind of awareness among senior management, and after this symposium, the Vice President of Research entrusted us three of us to the task of using the design of new assessment ideas. So this was the beginning of co-creation, so to say. However, important thing is that this coincides with the large-scale funding proposal. That's another trick, but because of that, we constrained for not being able to make it public, our plans, but we wanted the feedback. So we decided to hold a briefing and study sessions on common, this system, and that helped us to get feedback from the faculty members, and we eventually had more than 10 or maybe close to 20 rounds of this kind of session, and it's still ongoing. So, the common is represented here with the 5 core values. And so university has come up with these 5 core perspectives that are usually defined at the university level. So express the values of research activities at the university. And the 5 perspectives, cumulative foundation, originality, maturing excellence, outreach impact, and network centrality. And in response to this university initiative, each research unit will define what they think of these 5 core perspectives, values in their research domain, and how they are going to enhance each value within the coming 10 years. So this will help each research unit to come up with their own version of loosely defined value, which is like among 5 unique things. These 2 maybe. One is the cumulative foundations, and that is a perspective that values research, whether in the science or humanities branch, the solid academic foundations carefully accumulates knowledge while continually renewing the we see the world. Okay. So it can be like Earth observatory data taken from the satellite. It has to be if you have the limited research grant, you can only do that for 5 years, and then after that there is no funding. We don't want that. So we want this kind of foundational research to be appreciated. And also there is something called maturing excellence, and this is like, if you look at the citation, also like it was not seen or cited, for some time, and then it suddenly shoots up because of the understanding and or many things change. The way your research is seen from outside is changed. But the point is that the undercurrent value remains the same. So we want to find a ways to appreciate that kind of invisible kind of research. And originality is probably the same, well represented in traditional kind of metrics. And network centrality might be unique, but it's like your activity becoming the hub of researchers or networks. If you have that kind of value in your research unit, that's also something to be appreciated. Outreach impact is probably the same as the impact as you know. And so these are the, now what we are doing is we set these 5 core perspectives, and we are now encouraging internal dialogue, helping research units define their own vision. And we need to balance narrative and the evidence in self-assessment sheets. That the format also is still in the development stage, so we are constantly fighting the battles that we found. And we want to develop training programs for all the stakeholders, including reviewers who will be involved in the formative assessment system. And for this, we would like to benefit from your initiatives, maybe that Australia, that New Zealand, the video clip. That's precisely what we want to develop. And maybe the FODEC initiative about Academy, that's also it clued me. So if you have anything ready for us to collaborate, we welcome. And the challenges ahead is the same. I mean, we need to find the right balance because there's so many metrics believe in our institution also, and how to bring them on board and make the right balance between narrative and the data evidence. So we probably, the open science initiative would be maybe one solution to that. And yeah, we would like to basically open up the dialogue about what we truly value in our research. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now going for another coffee break. Before we eat and get food on our teeth, let's take the group photo. And then we can eat and have a relaxed conversation. And then we're setting up the panel. So the panel is going to be composed of everyone you've heard and Mumita. So when we come back, I will introduce Mumita, who is going to be the first time we will hear from Mumita today. But all the questions that are in your heads right now, that's when we will bring them all to the fore to ask all our panelists. So that's the slide that Maria is already setting up. So that's after the break. So we are introducing you now to the panel, which will discuss your questions. So get them ready. Jeannie and Cameron will moderate the panel, but we have a new face in the stage, Mumita Kohli. Thank you, Mumita, for joining the panel. She is a researcher and policy analyst specializing in open science, responsible research assessment, scholarly communication, with a focus on evidence-based advocacy. And she holds a PhD in organic chemistry from Vienna. And she currently works as a senior research analyst at the DST Center for Policy Research in Bangalore. And she's also a research fellow at the Research on Research Institute, RORI. And she is in our steering committee of DORA, and also in the IAU Open Science Expert Group, and she's also the editor of the Open Knowledge section of Patina, the Librarianship Elevated, and is also a member of the steering board of Open Science Monitoring Initiative. Thank you, Mumita, for joining the panel. And I suppose I'll give the floor to Jeannie and to Cameron. First, perhaps also explaining why is Mumita there and how is India evolving on these conversations? Jeannie, can you take over?
Yes, Cameron and I will be tag teaming on this, but so our aim is also to have lots of participation from the audience. So we've got a couple of set questions, obviously, but then we'd love to hear your questions. And we will be finishing at 1, so I'm going to ask the panel generally to try and keep it short to the point. That would be great. But if it's something we absolutely don't cover, we can always come back to it. So for me, we wanted to make sure that we wanted to get your perspective from India. I know that you've been working diligently there, and I guess so the first question to you is, what are the challenges that you found in implementing research assessment in India, and how does that differ from other parts of the world? And then I'll be opening that up to the rest of the panels to reflect on that. So Manisha, you
So as we're discussing that, actually, what we heard in the presentation in Asia Pacific is that there is some, at least in a direction, the research assessment movement has started or going somewhere. But unfortunately in India, even if we're trying for a couple of years now to bring the agenda of reforming research assessment into the forefront, but we have not been able to, it's not yet a success. There is a very small success story that we'll keep it for the end, but with the start with. So the challenges, maybe this challenges many of countries or many of the system will identify with. The major challenge for us is that, of course, it's a very big country, a very big research assessment system, and now we have completely bought into the culture of quantitative research assessment. So the thing is that, of course, we usually adopt whatever happens in Europe or US, maybe a little delay, maybe a 5 to 10 years delay, and then when we adopt, we get completely immersed into it. And this is exactly the system now, because in our system, number of papers, journal impact factors specifically, and also citation and H indices, these are like the benchmark of quality. And now it is in such a position that it's very difficult to make the system dislodge for it, because we just have adopted it. People, maybe last 10 years, people have seen that as their gold standard and adopted it. Now, just now when they adopted, asking them to change it, it's of course, they're not going to change it. And also another problem is the researcher themselves, specifically who are in the leadership position, and also many mid-career researchers, they grew up in this system. So for them, again, to change it, which they grew up in, they don't know what are the alternatives, and they don't trust the alternative yet. So these are the two major challenges for us to bring this conversation to make the changes. But there are two another challenges as well, which I should mention. That is also another important factor, is that we are a growing research system. A lot of publications are coming up, and journals, the publishers, is that probably one of the most lucrative market at this point in globally. So they're just flocking in. We have every time all the big publishers meeting with the higher scientific body, like Principal Scientific Advisor's Office. So they yield also a lot of power. And this is not just in the top level. They also then have access to the university library with a very legitimate challenge for channel. For example, they would go there in the pretext of helping you with research integrity. So these are various ways the system is in a momentum where it is not been able to get out of it. And I also told another final point that I wanted to mention is the university ranking. So we in India, we had introduced this in 2000, it started from 2016, national ranking system for all the institutions. This is voluntary and no monetary incentive through this ranking, but this is very important for universities, specifically the private university. Again, growing system, we did not have the public universities to cater to the needs, so government allowed a lot of private universities. Now the private universities are growing ecosystem, but for them to bring the legitimacy to attract students, because their revenue is from students, this university ranking helps a lot. And in this ranking, all the research related parameters is completely based on number of publication and citation, and that too only Scopus and Web of Science Index journals. So you can understand that how we have excluded everything else. And of course, universities, these private universities publish a lot, very bad quality, but still every research paper now, at least 95% of them can find a journal. Because there are plenty of journals. If not, they will create a new journal, Asian Journal or something, and the new papers can get through. So this is exactly, since I'm just talking about a challenge, these are the challenges. We have not been able to bring the reform agenda forefront, but still I told that I will tell also a small success story. So the small success story is that we have a new funding agency established, and this new funding agency is more like an apex body, and it's run by a CEO. And because of the advocacy efforts, we could make him do in the recent call for proposal for big grants that who are the principal investigators must disclose that if they have some retraction in their name and the reasons for it. Nobody wants to penalize if there is an honest retraction. So retraction and the reason for it. I think, I mean, I don't know if we can call it a success, but still it's a stake.
Yeah.
So that's all I would have to say.
Fantastic, and that's such a good example of the challenges of trying to change an enormous system. So, so I might pick up on two things, and I'll go down the panel. Start with you, John. The idea about trust and inertia, and how you reflect on challenges, changing things, what you're doing.
I mean, I think that the majority of what we're talking about is inertia. That, like, even people who, whether or not they are or are not interested in evolving research assessment practices, they lean on inertia as the reason why they're either not going to talk to you or there's not going to be change. I mean, a lot of this, I was saying earlier, you know, it's not even about the culture of research, it's also just about human dynamics and commercial dynamics. A lot of it is just vendor lock-in. You buy a certain service, you use the service, and then after a while, because you've used that service for so long, you're like scared, well, what do I do if I leave? Scopus Web of Science says, you know, and these ranking systems, and it's like, you know, a great example we had actually when we were at PLOS was we would, you know, PLOS at the time was interested in looking at how many page views and downloads it had and realized that halfway through a year that we had kind of screwed up our processing. And the page views were actually very different than what were being displayed on the website. And we just corrected that algorithm, and we, you know, obviously people, it was making it correct meant that people were very upset because, you know, they had relied so much on the wrong numbers that making them correct to them was more important for you to keep consistent wrong numbers than it was to tell the right story. And I think that, like, that's a human dynamic, you know, some of it's commercial, it's vendor lock-in, some is just human nature of like wanting to stick with what you can compare with your own past and your own future. And so I think that I was saying this before in the opening, like we're kind of trying to sell the story of nuance to people who want just cut and dry answers. And that's where change comes in, and like change management and, you know, these types of things. The struggle is really in that. And so, you know, the inertia is inertia of practice, but it's also the inertia of human nature, you know, like of how we act. So.
Yeah, in the end, it's a human system.
Yeah.
So, Bianca, what about you? What about the challenges and facing taking the story out?
Yeah, lots of things, maybe on open resources, but maybe also in general, building on what some of you said, from listening to these discussions also within the Netherlands, but broader. I think adding to that inertia is also very much a waiting for each other and blaming or putting, well, I'm just going to call it blame, putting blame on other actors. Like, yes, the funders expect this of us, so we cannot change. Yes, but we cannot expect that of our PhD students. And then PhD students say, yeah, we want to, but we are not allowed to by our principal investigators. And it's really keep different actors in the system keeping each other hostage. And at least from what I've seen in the Netherlands, and I don't want to say that that is the recipe for change anywhere because it's very much contextualized. But I think what really broke this inertia in the Netherlands is some actors taking responsibility, in our case it was our national funder, and just taking steps and making change and being the first. And then you see that it breaks open a lot of that resistance, a lot of change all of a sudden is possible. So that's also as an observation and perhaps a slight way forward. I think more from the open research perspective thing, the challenge we have is the reliance on the systems, but also if we want to change that, if we want to be more inclusive, then that also has the responsibility of actually being inclusive and taking into account the different systems and not expecting everyone to conform to the same format and structure to be included. So not expecting everyone to start registering DORs for everything if there are concerns about the cost of that. Yes, help with that, but also try to integrate different systems that are already in use to be able to really able to be inclusive. And that's a challenge. And it's also a good opportunity, I think.
Yes, yeah. I really like the idea that, funders don't think the universities want to act and the universities don't think the funders want to act. So having people in the room actually helps break that down. I think it's really helpful. So Tina, what about you? What are you reflecting on the sort of challenges in getting things done at QUT?
Thanks, Jean. So I was just trying to frame it in the context of this trusted inertia. Now I was going to add in how we manage change and resource, that change and the benefits and risks. So I think in the context of trust, getting that buy-in from researchers, from faculties, from the institution is really critical at the beginning, and that informs the co-design that you were talking about, which I really love the way you framed that. And then the inertia, I guess the risks with that is that there's the defaults to the old systems that are easy. You're just trying to measure research by the number of articles and what journals they're in. That's much less time intensive than having to read narratives and to think about other ways of valuing the research. And the risk, I suppose, of just having a journal impact factor or something by another name, by creating another system or hierarchy of metrics, really. And then I was thinking about how we go about having change and the importance of resourcing and the cost of resourcing the change in terms of time and education, having the actual assessors develop all these beautiful things and they don't even, engage with them because that also takes their time. Two critical things at QUT that I think we're still really working on are the narrative CV. We haven't really gone that far down, really from an institutional level, having templates and for researchers to think about. But we have done something, because I was thinking about what we actually have done. We're focusing on impact case studies, and then on one view, those impact case studies are a micro version of a really specific narrative CV. So we have done a lot of work on impact case studies. I've got a few more things and I'll stop. The risks and benefits, I think being really realistic about the risks, but focusing on the benefits and the opportunities, that's your language. So not, people used to always say when we were consulting, we don't want to disadvantage our researchers by in the internal Australian sector, if they want to move between universities, if everyone else isn't doing it, they're going to be doing things at QUT that aren't recognised and valued elsewhere. Moving in and out between the university and industry is another thing that people now are doing, and it's encouraged and valued. And then internationally aligning, being able to move across the sector internationally. And I think then focusing on the opportunities, that's what we had a conversation in the break about the invisible work that can now be captured, and capturing work that people are doing that are really important is important work that's never really been recognised. And by recognising it and rewarding it, we can actually encourage and foster that important underlying culture. So yeah, that was my thoughts.
Yes, thanks, Steve. So Alan, I was struck by one thing you said in your presentation, which you said as well, we're a funder, we can just do it. So maybe expand on that, because maybe your assessors are not quite doing it yet.
Well, I kind of covered that. Yeah, we can lead the horse to water, but if the horse doesn't want to drink, even though we pay them to drink, they don't necessarily. I thought what I picked on was a little bit the challenges with Indigenous research policy, which is part of our responsible research. And there's a couple of layers there. So one is about inertia. So obviously one of the reasons that New Zealand is particularly keen on promoting Indigenous research is that our Indigenous population is only 20% of the total population, yet that 20% is overrepresented in every negative socioeconomic statistic you can imagine. School dropout, levels of incarceration, poverty, absolutely everything. And so the policy to encourage Indigenous research, which is called Vision Mātauranga, Mātauranga simply means knowledge in Te Reo Māori, it was intended to underpin a general uplift for the participation of Māori people into the research community. So two levels of resistance against that and inertia. One of them is people like me, old white men who don't cope with change very easily and particularly don't understand the Indigenous perspective. So getting our assessor pool, who are largely old white men, to embrace the policy, to positively apply it, that is an ongoing challenge. The second inertia that we face is the policy is not universally supported by all our governments. So when we have a change of political persuasion of the government of the day, this either gets more or less support from government, which obviously then flows through not just the policy that the degree to which we can implement the policy, but also it kind of sets the underlying culture which can reinforce or help shift that inertia. And then the final challenge is actually in the research assessment process itself. So like all responsible research assessors, we bring an international flavour to our assessors. I think something like 20 to 30% of our College of Assessors are from outside New Zealand. I think it's more actually, but the majority are from Australia because that's a cheap phone call. But nonetheless, we have an international flavour. And the way that we implement our Vision Mātauranga policy through our assessment process is that assessors are asked to consider Indigenous knowledge through every aspect of a research proposal, whether it's the research excellence, the makeup of the team, its ability to create impact for Māori people, and how they would actually achieve that in practice. Now, obviously, asking a New Zealand old white male to understand that and fairly assess that is a challenge. Asking someone from Australia, Uruguay, Czechoslovakia, Singapore, that's much more of a challenge. So there's a conflict there between wanting to maintain diversity of our assessor pool, but also having local context coming through our assessment. And that's an ongoing tension. We haven't solved that. Again, our response so far has to provide really good training materials, which our statistics tell us international assessors are no better at reading than our local assessors. So that's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I mean, from the journal perspective, we have the same challenge with Indigenous research. So I think that the issue is to find your peers who are elsewhere. So, for example, we use a lot of Canadian researchers where this is not a similar system, but you're exactly right. It's tension.
That's exactly right, and we have increasingly brought Canadians, Australians into our system for that exact reason. We have a particular policy with a particular flavour, which is shaped by the needs of our Indigenous culture. So that, they're not all created equal.
That's right. You've got a business.
But absolutely, thinking creatively like that, I think, is part of the switch.
Yeah. Somebody said that in one of the panel sessions earlier about thinking creatively about solutions. I thought that was interesting. So you, what about you? What are the major challenges you face?
Thank you. So definitely the inertia is there, but in the Japanese context, or maybe it might be similar in other regions, but we found that inertia seen not only from the senior researchers, but from early care researchers. They actually, when we go to the briefing sessions, definitely there will be one or two very enthusiastic, understanding and appreciating this kind of change, but there is always one or two early care researchers very strong resentment against, how are you going to change the rules again, kind of, and we didn't realize until we thought early care researchers are more open to, holistic kind of approach, but it is not, maybe because of the in Japan there was lost decades after the economic recession for a long time, and their opportunities have hugely disadvantaged because of that, and maybe because of that there was how do you say, the early care researchers thought this matrix is an easy way to tick mark and then progress your career, and so we have to be mindful of the change and the consequences, and that's something that we are still struggling, but overall, to our surprise, the opportunities might lie in the older generation who have a better understanding about.
All right, thank you. I'll pass to Cameron, and then we are going to go to the audience.
So we're talking about alignment and difference, context, and shared principles. So I'm going to get the audience to think about your question in terms of the question I'm going to pose to the panel. Because I think we've heard this, you're studying contrasts, right? So the global and the local. John talked about the nuance, but also the standards. We have quantitative indicators for comparison, comparability, and resource allocation, but local contextual narrative with a deliberate effort to avoid the ability to compare. So I guess, and that's sort of central to the conversation here. What are the things we share? Where's the point of alignment? And perhaps what are the key points of difference? So thinking about what you've heard from the other panelists, what's something that you really feel like aligns strongly in your context? And what's something you think is quite different and that isn't appropriate? And maybe let's surface some of the things that are real points of difference. Can I start with you again, Momita?
This time I really have the hard job because we are trying to change, we could not change anything, and I think it's the success stories of the other region that what they have been able to build using alternatives that might help, and how then we can connect the story to the local context. For example, we see in our country that now there is some vision for 2047, like in our 100 years of our independence, all of this. So then how we can connect to that, and there is also another understanding that we need to invest more in science and technology. We need to do more research which is aligned with the societal goal And so if these are the narratives that's coming from the government, then we can align the stories that how we can change our assessment system to align it to those bigger vision and goal. How can we present it to the policymakers, which is actually the senior scientist in our case, because in the policymaking position in India, it's not about the politicians. In science ecosystem, the leaderships are the senior researchers themselves. So we have to bring it to the notice and do this advocacy even more stronger. So this is where I think is the opportunities come in for us. We have to design it this way. I mean, that would be my initial thoughts.
Anyone else want to jump in on either that, or I'll force John to do it? Alan's volunteering. Yep.
Yeah, so I think one of the differences that strikes me is I think the New Zealand context and the use of KPIs and metrics doesn't quite resonate with the level of challenge that I think I'm hearing most other people on the road. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. I think one of the local New Zealand contexts is that we're a consciously egalitarian society, so we consciously do value quality over quantity. So I think it's never been so ingrained in our culture, particularly in science assessment, to use the metrics like H factors and general impact factors and all those things, H indexes. So the shift, I think, for us is less in terms of moving away from a metric-based system. And there was another point I was going to make, is completely gone out of my head.
What's unique? What do you think is different in your context? Or what's aligned? Sorry.
Yeah, well, so I think the alignment is, I think there's because of that egalitarian culture of New Zealand, then I guess it's the egalitarian fairness goals of responsible research. There is actually good alignment. So I'd say that we were very predisposed to the journey that many others were just starting. Well, the other thing I was going to say is, other than the egalitarian nature of New Zealand, probably the more pragmatic reason that we went heavily KPI metric based is we weren't all that well organised initially. So we never built a system that then became that needed to be changed based around metrics and KPIs. It was always a more qualitative system, just through either laziness or lack of resourcing, probably both.
I think it's really interesting that there's this shift in different parts of the world. In Europe in particular, very strongly towards narrative and contextualized descriptions, and then in both Australia and New Zealand, a move to, we've got to reduce reporting burden, we use landscaping, and therefore we're down to data. Indicators, often quantitative indicators. So it's an interesting difference in direction of travel. Actually, you and Bianca. So I was really interested that you picked up on the. I was thinking as you were speaking that the connection with the Dutch strategic evaluation protocol was quite interesting, but then you sort of pointed to the Finnish examples. Could you expand a little bit on that and how that relates to the differences and similarities?
Right. Yeah. And I think most of what we are implementing, we learn through thanks to DORA and international network. And then I was, of course, the 2019 recognition and awards were really, spoken widely within Japan. And I think that was probably the starting point of, our interest that the assessment, we do not want to discuss at the individual level, but the unit level is something that we value. So, yeah. So we conducted, I think through Japan, involved in that system, and through that we learned that in Finland there is a national assessment system. I mean, the law is there, but then the university level, they need to come up with their own version of assessment system. So as a result, they make it make everything openly accessible. So we benefited from that, and we conducted interviews, and but we realized that there is a huge difference also, cultural background, like we are far from that egalitarian kind of society, and our society is not really based on trust, like they claim to be. So there is lots of gaps, but still, it's not a bad ideal thing to, envision. So we are benefiting from, every pieces. And then today also we learned the Academy initiative and all that, little tricks are always learned. So I appreciate it.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of how that Dutch experience is playing out, because it has been a world-leading experience at the same time. It's really particular to the Netherlands.
Yeah, and I think that's one, if you talk about differences, what we have in our Dutch strategy evaluation protocol, which by the way, words matter. It used to be a standard evaluation protocol, and it then changed to strategy evaluation protocol. And I think that summarizes the changes that were meant to affect. But I think contextualized is very important, that evaluation in analysis is not tied to direct monetary consequences. So the allocation of money to the different universities is not decided by that evaluation, it's decided by student numbers and other things. So that gives a little bit more leeway in experimenting with that. It's really more a formative assessment to start with, that makes it easier. At the same time, we see that same inertia. There's a lot of talk about starting from your values, starting from strategy, and also providing a lot of freedom for that contextualized what is important, what kind of indicators, what type of impact is important linked to that strategy. At the same time, what we see universities and groups doing, to the extent that they take advantage of that freedom, that's often quite limited. There's that same inertia, like, okay, we're used to this. We're not quite sure whether the other things are accepted, looking at each other. So I think there's still quite a long way to go into actually making that into reality. But I feel very lucky to be in a system that at least affords that opportunity.
Yeah, so and I think the Dutch system is again quite a small one, so change.
That helps.
Just that I was going to say, since we're here as part of like a Force 11 co-located event, Force 11 runs a publishing group platform called Upstream. So if you go to upstream.force11.org, there actually was an article about the Dutch system that was published up on Upstream on April 21st that walks through exactly what Bianca's bringing up, and I think it's just a quick description of the different frameworks that have been adopted, because it is a great model for the world.
So anything else to add on alignment? Why is data different?
Well, data is different for a lot of reasons. I don't know if that's really the conversation. I mean, we could talk about that for a long time. I think that the larger conversation you're bringing up, though, around like local versus global. I mean, the challenge is that we're in what we could call like a change movement, and change movements have different levels of success, right? And so there's a level where success is just us all coming together and saying there's a problem, and then us all saying that the current status quo is not good enough, and that is like a global and local success, and the idea of like dropping resources into a pond and seeing a ripple, that's like something that happens at a global level, but also at a local level. And so like change movement and change management and these types of things, they're like successes are not just the fact that like one day, the impact factor will be dead. It's like, okay, that'd be awesome. But there's a lot of successes along the way. And I think that we need to value and respect those successes as they happen, and at some level those can just be the tension that we're putting into this community that says like this is not good enough, and that in itself creates positive change.
Absolutely, and learning and places for learning.
Yeah,
and
and
places like
speaking to data, that's actually a big piece of make data count, is like just inserting into the dialogue, being in rooms like this and saying like, we are all on the same page, and plus there is research data and there's research software. These things matter and they're part of this and they also need tending to. And we can all be on the same page about that and there can be success in it.
And before we go to questions, so warm your questions up. I want to see those hands coming up. Yeah, good. Tina, anything more on the alignment differences? Anything that's specific or different?
Yeah, thank you. In Australia, we also have the really significant issue of valuing and measuring Indigenous research, and it's something that we as a university are grappling with now. And I was just reflecting, I mean, the idea here is that we're acknowledging diversity of research and researchers, but even within what we're doing, I think we need a framework and a way of evaluating Indigenous research so that we learned a really good lesson in a consultation we had the other day. I mean, it's listening and measuring from the way that the Indigenous researchers see their research and do their research rather than trying to fit their research into our frameworks. I think that's really quite critical, and that's something we're trying to work out how we can get that acknowledged and the representation on all the committees that we have. In Australia, I suppose there's people that would be much better placed to speak to this than me, but as an observation, as a researcher on the ground and a research centre leader, we're going through some change in the way that nationally we assess research, and we're probably not even doing it at the moment. It was like the last one we tried to have, I think they abandoned it when everyone had half done all the work. It was fairly soul-destroying, really. The resources that went into that. So, I mean, if there was some more government leadership on, and I think the change is coming from the researchers and the institutions and the funders, because the ARC's had a review and then HMRC's changed about how you have to present your research and applications. So I think perhaps that's an Australian thing. And the other observation that I had was thinking about funding. There's a really big emphasis, certainly in my university, sector, I assume, about not just focusing on funding from the traditional competitive research grants, but also philanthropic funding and industry funding. So that's why these impact case studies and partnerships with industry are becoming increasingly important.
Yeah, and perhaps to seize that one point, we haven't talked much about the legal frameworks under which things are operating and how different they are in different places as well, just something to be mindful of. One example I came across recently is the difference between, in New Zealand, the Waitangi Treaty sets up the relationship between government and the nation and Indigenous peoples, where in Australia, probably less said, better about current state treaties and formal relations. But that makes a big difference to what people are required to do, what they need to do, and the legal frameworks under which institutions operate is also. But if we saw one hand ready to go.
Hi, I am Rocío. I'm from CrossFit. Thank you very much for the panel. I have one question for the policymakers and implementers from the panel, and it's how do you ensure, because all we're talking about is change that is rooted in culture, research culture, and cultural change that needs to happen, and that's not something that happens overnight. So how are you planning to ensure that the momentum and all the motivation and effort that it's being put at the moment is sustained over time, so it doesn't happen? I mean, so what is happening, I think, in some places with open access doesn't happen for research assessment reform, so that frustrations about the system and the landscape not changing fast enough doesn't translate into changing policy after just 5 years, for example, like changing policies or removing funding after 5 years might not be helpful, because 5 years might not be enough for those changes to happen. So how are you ensuring that drive doesn't stop when changes don't come as fast as we would like?
I think that might be directed to you in the first instance, Alan. Maintaining momentum.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question. And a couple of layers to that. So one is, within our funding agency, making sure that everyone is on board with the mission, because obviously our role is to push the mission down and out. And so making sure that momentum is maintained regardless of change of personal circumstances and all of those things. So that's just at an organisation, and that's important. The second thing is then trying to build on the successes. So you can't eat the whole elephant in the day. You have to eat bits of the elephant at a time. So I've talked about a couple of the initiatives that we. So we didn't try to eat the entire elephant at the same day. So we talked about the initiatives that we rolled out. We did the narrative CV one year. We did the demand control another year. There'll be an initiative moving our Indigenous research framework from quite a low base on the vision marker and the policy to one that's based more on treaty Waitangi principles, because as you say, there's a legislative framework around that. So it's about trying to bake your wins and then move on from it. But then overlaying all of this was what I finished my presentation with, is that we're in a process of top-down research reform in New Zealand. And so that's got completely orthogonal objectives, which aren't necessarily aligned or misaligned, but they're just orthogonal. But that is what is consuming all of our efforts and resources currently, because that is a top-down imperative. So I think that's where we've got the real challenge within New Zealand at the moment for the next 3 to 5 years is we've banked some wins, we're in a good trajectory, but this other thing has come in which is likely to overtake it, and we don't want to go backwards. So we need to be very conscious of trying to implement the reforms without losing the wins that we've banked and reducing momentum in the research reform.
Can I just reflect on that before I hand to somebody else, which is that one of the things that we did when we were consulting for the 2 guides that we came up with, one on research institutions and one of the funders, is there a multitude of activities and different places to start. We had endless debates about whether we even numbered the activities, because that was a sort of, does it imply that one's more important than the other? But actually, to your point, wherever you come in is important, and it's not necessarily one place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just reflecting on that, and the question was asked about funders and policymakers. I think it goes similarly to the type of advocacy that a lot of us have been doing for a long time. I think important also from a policy perspective to make sure that this is not seen as just an individual project that gets the attention of today, and then when something else comes in, it's either thought of then passed off because something else is more important, or it's considered, we've done this, the part of for like 5-year funding has ended, and then it can take care of itself. So really keep foregrounding the importance of that in the broader context. And in addition to that, I think keep having these conversations, and with turnover of people, these same conversations need to be had over and over again. And that can sometimes feel repetitive, but I also think it's very important to keep that conversation alive and keep foregrounding the importance.
Maintain the interest. Is there a question?
Hi, my name is Tim. I'm from the Netherlands, Erasmus University. So question for the panel, because I think, Tina, you mentioned leadership buy-in, right? And a lot of the work we're doing in this reform and research assessment is actually inherently political, because we're trying to change culture, and yet leadership changes, rectorship, people come and go, and it's very difficult to say, okay, this year we have a really good leader, and then the next a couple of years then we lose somebody, and how do we make sure that these leaders that are promoted or they're chosen have the same ideas? And also there's so many different systems, right? There's so many different cultures. We have Japan, India, New Zealand, Australia, Netherlands, US, and we also know that politically it's very sensitive right now. So there's so many things that are, so many variables in place right now that are affecting how we're assessing research, and mostly we're also seeing it from a extremely economic point of view. So just wrapping up, the question is, can we really depend on leader, and does really transparency, opening up everything, will essentially lead to trust and a better, more democratic way of decision making?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I had the privilege of having the microphone for a second. One of the things I've observed is you've got to do the groundwork to be ready when the leaders fall into place. It's not just about looking for the leaders and hoping for them to come. It's the groundwork that's happening in this room sets up the conditions where you can take advantage of those moves. But yeah, Tina, go past you. You just alluded to that. DVC in change, and you're now sitting in that chair role. So.
That's what I was going to say. Thank you. So I totally agree. I think you seize the opportunity when there's appetite for reform. That's what we always do when we want law reform. We actually forge forward when the timing's right. But I think what's really important is that the change can be embedded. I mean, at QUT, we have got our principles of research assessment. We signed up to DORA, but in particular, this commitment is on the main research page as a public statement. It's going to be pretty hard for them to move that off. And the other part about the change in leadership, I agree with you. It's not always going to be the case that you will have someone in charge that is on the agenda. But I think that, I suppose, that's why I've sort of taken back over of the chair of the steering group so we can keep it going, pending the new DVCR being appointed. The acting DVCR is on this panel. When the recruitment was done for the new DVCR, it was one of the criteria that the person was going to understand the reimagined research assessment principles and understand the sector changes and the international changes. So I think that with the recruitment, at least they're going to have to say in the interview, we've already had the interview, so we're waiting to find out who it is, unless there's someone here. But I think you can sort of embed it in a few ways. The change to move at the right time when there is some evidence of the need, but also you've got the ear of the senior leaders. Embed the change in policy and a public statement. And then I suppose if the leaders are changing as part of the recruitment of those leaders, of course they have to understand the international and national agenda, and that should be an overt part of the process. I think that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more question before we get to final remarks. So take a question from that. We come back and wrap up.
Hi everyone, I'm Elaine from PLOS. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. I'm curious about the intersection between the work that you do and the university rankings, whether it's, the big ones or a local one. What does that intersection look like? Is it a challenge? Is it an opportunity? Or do you engage with them in some way?
That's a great question. We'll also come back to this point later in the afternoon. Does anyone want to talk about it?
I think it's a very complex system as well, because when I was talking about university ranking, some universities in India, like the top ones, who is not at all dependent on the university ranking for anything as per se, though of course they will anyway be on the top of university ranking. So these universities, because the funding comes from the government to them directly, so they are not really that much bothered about all of this quantitative ranking, whereas the private ones are. So talking with these big universities, one of which I come from as well, they are very indifferent to this kind of conversation because inherently they have always used qualitative assessment process, though I would say it's not really perfect, and even then also they have actually adopted a quantitative one which they don't recognize yet. They just bypass the conversation. But what we try to do more with our work, specifically one of the major work that I do is trying to highlight that how university rankings are distorting research priorities. And talking to private universities does not directly help. What we try to use this all our research in a very in a format where it can be published in newspaper article. So the top newspapers in the country sometimes picks them up. I mean, we could do this conversation. We could move this conversation about this institutional ranking framework and make them also to reconsider. Nothing has changed yet, but people now are very much aware of the problem. There is a lot of conversation happening in university regarding this university ranking is because we published in columns in newspaper, in the top newspapers which have physical copies as well. And they have like section, for example, one section is called data points, where you can just tell the story of through data. You don't have to really write. You have many graphs and all of this. So that also helped. So I think this is in a way how we try to approach to move the conversation on how university ranking is creating a lot of bad incentives, and we're seeing lots of research integrity issues. And currently also we are trying through that channel also to make, not exactly through I would say newspaper, but putting out more resources in a web page and all about how we are spending so much money on journals paying APC, where the journals are even getting delisted. It's also connected because if you see why people have published in those journals, because it was easy to publish. The quality control was not there. But when we would say that in Indian and currency you have spent a huge amount which could have just gone for research. So this is another angle we have now started to explore if we can do something in this. So these are the ways we kind of, our work informs certain ways to do policy or policy making.
Great. And there's something, maybe I'm gonna give everyone a chance to make one last statement. I'm gonna frame it around something super. If you didn't get a chance to talk about rankings, you can read in. So I guess my question to the panel is, what does success look like with regard to research assessment, particularly for the Asia Pacific or for your organisation as it relates to this? And maybe one thing that would help it get there. So we've got 4 minutes to do to lunch. You're gonna have to be quick. So I'll start with you. Yes, last question. So what does success look like for you? One thing to get you there.
Sorry, to look back. I was prepared to talk something else, but yeah. So I want to repeat anyway that research assessment is so complex, and then even now we are stepping one step ahead from principles to implementation, and then you realize that the diversity of this understanding of how research assessment or the quality of research look like, depending on where you come from or what your disciplinary background is. So it is very important that research professionals or researchers or like-minded researchers like this kind of platform exist to share the common understanding of what we feel a little isolated back in our own university is just a matter of that context, but we actually share core values here, and that gives kind of strength to move forward. So that is in a way hopefully a success for the future.
Fantastic. Core values, I like that. Yeah, Alan, what about you? What do you need?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've gone through many answers in my head in the last 3 minutes. The first one was going to be, what does success look like? Is that we fund as a funder, we fund the best research. And then it led me to thinking, well, what does that actually mean? Because the best is in context. So I guess increasing the diversity, excellence and impact from research, that's kind of what we're aiming for. But the words of my former manager, many whom of you will know, Prue Williams, echo around my head, which is, as a funder, we never lack for good research to fund. Our goal is simply not to fund bad research. So it's a low bar, but it also means that there is a diversity of research, and there's never enough money to go around. So I think it's just making sure that there's equity of access is what success looks like, and that we do fund a portfolio that has a really good diversity of outcomes.
Yeah, great. Katie, what about you?
Thank you. Just building on that, I suppose I think this needs to be embedded in how we document and report on our research, and we can do that. And even at our university, still, they talk in the DDCR updates about the number of Q1, D1 articles. So sort of making sure that the reporting and celebrating of research actually aligns with the agenda. So there have been changes in the way that we celebrate research. So it's not only the best articles, it's the best non-traditional research, well, not the best, but exemplars of non-traditional research outputs. We're actually in discussions now about acknowledging Indigenous research excellence, the impact case study, so that diversity, documenting it, reporting on it and celebrating it, I think is a measure of success. And I suppose in terms of rewarding, that then can be embedded into the recruitment practices, into the promotion practices, and how we fund. That is a form of rewarding research, isn't it? Funding it. So yeah, and getting that diversity of not just research, but researchers and outputs.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Well, first of all, just taking this opportunity, I really like what you said about we're not trying to fund the best research, we're just trying to not fund the bad research. I don't think it's a low barrier. I think it's really fundamental reframing of what it means to do assessment. So kudos to that. Maybe that'll be a bit provocative. In 5 years' time, I would really like if these type of conversations are expanded and really integrated, and we can have these conversations about, for instance, how we learned from the Common Initiative in Japan, or how the Bogota Manifesto from Daniela is being taken by other countries. And we can say that, okay, for instance, in the Netherlands, we looked at the Common framework or the Bogota Manifesto, and then we made changes based on that. And we can have a really more global exchange of these initiatives.
Right. John, what about you?
I think I would just add to what Tina was saying about non-traditional or non-paper outputs. I think that success would look like just a normalization of non-publications as part of hiring, tenure, and promotion. What specifically would that mean? With much closer to the CV models that are around. What are the 5 most the outputs that you are the most proud of, instead of what are the 5 highest ranked for whatever random metric, and making that be the norm is definitely what I would suggest. And it's not about reframing publications; it's about reframing all outputs.
At least you get the last word.
It's very difficult because I started with the fact that we didn't even have any success in our country, and if I have to think about what it should look like, of course I don't know what it could look like because we are so down in the line. But actually what I felt is that if we can make a change where our researchers, we can slow down. We don't have to go into this rat race. We can think about a problem, even if it's a curiosity-driven research, even if it's a societal problem that my country is facing. If the researchers, as a researchers, we get now that opportunity because our research assessment system has evolved in such a way, people can slow down, they can think about the problem, they can do that research, and they don't have that I have to publish in this PDF kind of paper format. I have a very holistic way to represent my research. I mean, that's where like data as well, or even non-traditional output. We have a way to represent the non-traditional output. You don't have to go for a journal paper. And that's, I mean, something maybe far down the line, that's where I think the success would look like. And there we need all of us, everybody's, all this conversation and such a platform. Maybe we will get all ideas and we can think about, okay, ideas is a wrong word, but a much better system.
Great. I'm going to try and summarize. So I think diversity of shared values, I think that's really important. The equity and diversity side of things from Anna. Celebrating the successes, like the successes that actually want to happen. Bianca, I like your idea. She actually learn from other countries and not reinvent another declaration. That's it. John, the normalization of all of this, and all of these conversations. And Manisha, I think for what you said, I reminded me of a conversation Tina and I had with the group of Indigenous academics last week when I said we talked about should universities actually do what they're supposed to do, which is serve society, and there was this sort of kind of snort of laughter in the room because of course that's what academics want to do, but we sort of moved away that to chasing metrics. So anyway, this was a fantastic panel. Can we all thank the panelists?